Chapter 37:27. After all, when he got full marks last time, they could still think that it was because of some problem with the pressure formation and that Linny had gotten lucky. But this time, he was relying on real strength. He got full marks in 2 consecutive rounds. If this kind of performance didn't make people realize how awesome Linny was, then they could only say that these people's brains had been kicked by donkeys. Junior brother Lin, you're really good. If it was me, I wouldn't have been able to take that hit. Senior brother Bitter Guy rarely showed such an excited expression. He clearly saw the danger of that hit just now. If it was him, he wouldn't have been able to survive, let alone be as relaxed as Lin Yi and survive with such a minor injury. What he didn't know was that Lin Yi's injury just now was not as light as it looked. Although he had the strength of the peak of the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm and had figured out the trick of using genuine chi to attack and defend, the lethality of that hit just now was comparable to 130% of the peak of the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm. Even if it was on Lin Yi, it was still not to be underestimated. However, because of the art of dragon mastery and the space in the Jade Pendant, even if the injury was serious, Lin Yi could easily and quickly heal quickly. That was why he could do it so calmly and dazzle everyone's eyes. Not only senior brother Bitter Guy, but also Xiao Ran, who had recovered from his injury, looked at Lin Yi with a burning gaze. He was so excited that he gave a thumbs up, and his admiration was overflowing. After all, this guy was a calm and introverted person. He was never good at expressing his feelings, let alone losing his composure when he was excited. But today, Lin Yi's performance really opened his eyes. Lin Yi could be the first to succeed in the Foundation Establishment realm. This could only mean that he was talented, but it didn't mean that he was really awesome. But as a newcomer in the secular world who had only been in the Welcome Pavilion for a month, he was able to withstand the full blow of a peak of the early stage of the Foundation Establishment realm so easily. This was really awesome. Not to say that it was unprecedented, but it was definitely not an exaggeration to say that it was domineering. In the past, Xiaoran only thought that boss Lin Yi, whom he was following, was a kind and honest person with great strength. But after today, he had to add another label to it, tyrannical beyond compare. Even though Xiaoran had been calm since he was a child, he couldn't help but feel a burning passion in his heart at this moment. If he followed such an overbearing and powerful boss like Lin Yi, his future would definitely be boundless. This was what Xiaoran thought. Li Zhengming, who was Lin Yi's underling, was thinking. At this moment, he was even more shocked than him. It had to be known that he was different from Xiaoran. Not only was he born on Heaven Stage Island, but he also came from the Clearwater Villa and had a superior family background. He had seen far more of the world since he was young than a newcomer from the secular world like Xiaoran. But even so, Lin Yi's performance today almost made him bite off his tongue. He even unconsciously gave birth to a feeling of worship and awe from the bottom of his heart. Li Zhengming couldn't help but murmur. No wonder boss Lin Yi clearly knew that the opponent had tampered with the situation and still dared to calmly accept the challenge of the early stage of Foundation establishment. He even dared to calmly accept the challenge of a peak early stage foundation building cultivator. It seemed that his foresight wasn't bad. He followed an extraordinary fellow. Hee. This lady really didn't make a mistake. Junior Lin Yi really hid his strength. Shanghai Laner couldn't brazenly show too much excitement, so she could only whisper excitedly to the little curly bear in her arms. Woo 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 woo. The little curly bear wrinkled its nose proudly. That goes without saying. TSK. I don't know who was the one who was so anxious just now. Shanghai Laner didn't know whether to laugh or cry as she rolled her eyes at it. Lin Yi was the last newcomer from Blue Cloud Pavilion to go on stage for the assessment. After he finished, it meant that all the newcomers from Blue Cloud Pavilion had finished their assessment. Next, they just needed to wait for the newcomers to finish healing, and they would be able to get the final points of the second round. After Blue Cloud Pavilion, it was Mysterious Pavilion's turn, and finally Blaster Pavilion's turn. With the previous performance of the Blue Cloud Pavilion newcomers as a reference, whether it was the newcomers from Mysterious Pavilion or Blaster Pavilion, the choices they made were obviously more rational and reliable. In addition, their strength was higher than the newcomers from Blue Cloud Pavilion, so their overall performance was naturally higher. However, It was worth mentioning that other than Meng Tong and Lin Yi, no newcomer from the other two pavilions dared to challenge the difficulty of the early stage of foundation establishment. Even the two early-stage foundation establishment masters, Kong Mingming and Zhong Pingliang, chose to challenge the early-stage foundation establishment and didn't have any thoughts of skipping levels. After all, they weren't as strong as Lin Yi, nor did they have a fourth-level recovery elixir like Meng Tong. If they challenged the early-stage foundation establishment peak, even if the examiner intentionally went easy on them, there was still a high chance that they would be killed in one move. It was better to play it safe. Anyway, the assessment points of the three pavilions were calculated separately. So what if Lin Yi got more God-level full marks? It had nothing to do with them. While the newcomers from Mysterious Pavilion and Blaster Pavilion were undergoing their assessment, the examiner in charge of the early-stage foundation establishment peak was pulled to a corner by Su Lingchong and Meng Jueguang. They wanted to know how Lin Yi was able to survive in such a situation, and so easily at that. Ma Jian, what happened just now? Did you use your full strength to deal with Lin Yi? Or did you secretly go easy on him, holding back like Meng Tong just now? Su Lingchong asked with an unfriendly expression. He couldn't understand what had happened today. No matter how he thought about it, he could only attribute the reason to Ma Jian. Other than this guy secretly going easy on Lin Yi, no other reason could explain how Lin Yi was able to pass so easily. In reality, even if Ma Jian secretly went easy on Lin Yi, it would still be impossible for Lin Yi to pass so easily. Think about it, Meng Tong, a guy who was on the same level as Lin Yi in name, had taken a fourth-level recovery elixir like the fourth-level recovery elixir and suffered a palm strike with 70% of the early-stage foundation establishment peak strength. Even now, he was still half dead. However, although it was hard to understand, compared to the nonsense of Lin Yi being able to easily withstand 130% of the early-stage foundation establishment peak strength, this explanation was much more convincing. Young Master Su, you're being wrongly accused. I really used all my strength just now. I didn't hold back at all. Ma Jian saw that Su Lingchong was doubting him. His face instantly paled, and he hurriedly cried out his innocence. Chapter 37:28. Really? Su Lingchong sized him up from the corner of his eyes. His expression was still doubtful. Absolutely. Ma Jian nodded his head heavily and hurriedly said, if I didn't use too much strength, I wouldn't have been caught off guard and rebounded by Lin Yi's true energy. What? True energy rebounded? That brat Lin Yi has such an ability? Su Lingchong was instantly flabbergasted, and he and Meng Jueguang looked at each other in dismay. Both of them were shrewd people, and from Ma Jian's current expression, they could basically determine that this fellow shouldn't be lying. They faintly felt that they seemed to have grasped the key point. True energy rebounded? Brother Liu, could it be that this brat Lin Yi has actually cultivated some kind of defensive martial skill? Meng Jueguang hurriedly asked. It should be, otherwise there's no way to explain why the true energy in this brat's body could rebound it onto my body. But I don't know what kind of defensive martial skill it is. Ma Jian nodded his head. Ever since he finished the test for Lin Yi, he had been pondering over this question. No matter how he thought about it, in the end, he could only conclude that it was a defensive martial skill. Otherwise, there was no other explanation. One had to know, disregarding those who specialized in defensive martial skills, ordinary cultivators could at most mobilize their true energy to defend against a portion of the damage. The only difference was the amount of damage they could defend against. As for people like Lin Yi who took advantage of the opportunity to use true energy to counterattack, it was simply unheard of. What he didn't know was that this was just an idea Lin Yi had come up with in a moment of inspiration to counter his attacks. Attacking and defending was a pure coincidence. If it was under normal circumstances, even if an ordinary person wanted to strengthen their defense, they would definitely choose to cultivate a defensive martial skill. This was the most orthodox and effective choice. If it was in a state of battle and there was no chance to make a last-minute effort, then in a situation where they knew their defense was not good, an ordinary person would focus on thinking of ways to avoid the opponent's attack and not foolishly stay on the spot and let the opponent hit them. Even if he couldn't avoid the attack, he would definitely think of a way to counteract the other party's attack. He wouldn't have the time to come up with some strange idea of using his true chi to attack and defend. The so-called offensive defense that used the true chi in one's body was completely a strange product that was produced under the special circumstances of the resistance assessment. Because of the rules of the examination, when faced with the examiner's attack, the newcomers could neither dodge nor counterattack. They could only stand there and let the examiner hit them. This left the rookies with only one choice, and that was to quickly use a defensive martial technique. If he didn't, he could only rely on his zhanqi to endure it. However, Linny had never been the kind of person who was willing to be beaten up. Even when faced with this kind of test, he would try his best to fight back within the rules. Because from a certain point of view, offense was the best defense. That was why he had thought of using the zhanqi in his body to counterattack the moment the examiner attacked him. But if he was still a heaven-ranked great perfection expert, then even if he thought of this idea, it would be useless, because a heaven-stage great perfection expert could only release true chi through their palms, and if he did so, it would obviously violate the assessment rules. The key was, Lin Yi was no longer a heaven-stage great perfection expert, but a peak early-stage foundation establishment expert who had hidden his true strength in front of everyone. In fact, when he had just succeeded in building his foundation, he had already realized that compared to when he was at heaven stage great perfection, there was a huge difference in the way he released his true chi. That was, not only could he release his true chi through his palms, he could also do it directly from the acupoints all over his body. In most cases, this was not of much use, because even if he could directly release true chi from the acupoints all over his body, true chi could only be true chi, and could not achieve the powerful effect of a martial technique. In other words, if Lin Yi wanted to display the effect of the Raging Fire 8 trigrams palm, then he would have to rely on his hands. It was impossible to achieve this by using the acupoints all over his body. And if it was purely releasing true chi, it could be used to scare some small fries, but it would be very difficult to pose a threat to experts of the same level, so it was not practical. However, being able to release true chi from the acupoints all over his body, in a special situation like the resistance assessment, coupled with the offensive-defensive idea that Linny had come up with, produced an unimaginable effect. When the examiner's palm hit Lin Yi's chest with 130% of its power, before it could cause any damage, the first thing it collided with was the powerful true chi erupting from the acupoints on Lin Yi's chest. And because the space in the jade pendant could quickly replenish his true chi, Lin Yi did not have to worry about the true chi in his body being completely depleted. So he could be unrestrained, using all his true chi to counterattack. In this way, before the examiner's attack with 130% of its power had reached its target, a portion of the damage had already been neutralized. By the time his palm actually hit Lin Yi's chest, it was actually only left with less than 100% of its power. As a true early-stage foundation establishment expert, Linny had to take a full blow from an expert of the same level head-on. No matter how heavily injured he was, it would definitely not be fatal. And with his art of dragon mastery combined with the endless pure true chi in the space in the jade pendant, healing this bit of injury was a piece of cake. That was why the scene that had blinded the eyes of everyone present had appeared. Taking a full blow from a peak early-stage foundation establishment expert head-on, and yet being able to recover from his injuries in such a short time without a change in expression. However, Su Lingqiong and the others had no idea that Linny had so many trump cards to rely on, and it was even more impossible for them to understand the various details within. From their point of view, if they wanted to explain this matter, there was only one possibility, and that was that Linny had cultivated some kind of defensive martial arts technique. I'm guessing that my 130% attack just now had been neutralized at least 90% by this kid's defensive martial arts technique. In other words, the actual damage that hit his body was actually less than 40%. That's why he was able to sustain such light injuries. Ma Jian deduced. At the side, Meng Jueguang nodded in agreement. That's right. He's an early-stage foundation establishment expert like Meng Tong. In theory, there shouldn't be too much of a difference in their endurance. Meng Tong had only taken a palm attack with 70% of its power, and had even taken a 4th-grade Great Rejuvenation pill, Yet he was still so heavily injured that he looked like he was on the brink of death. If it were Lin Yi, he would probably be in a similar state. So the only logical explanation is that the defensive martial arts technique he had used just now was rather powerful, enough to neutralize most of the damage from Brother Ma's palm. That's the only logical explanation. Chapter 3729. As an expert who had just advanced to the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm, he had mastered a defensive martial skill that could allow him to withstand an all-out attack from an expert at the peak of the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm. Even in young Master Su's eyes, it was already enough to meet the standard of concealment. The key point was that in the past month or so, they had not found any signs on Lin Yi's body at all. He had really hidden himself well. Little did they know that this was purely their own imagination. Although Lin Yi had many trump cards, he did not have this type of defensive martial skill. They had really thought too much this time. Indeed, it's all my fault for not noticing this beforehand. This brat took advantage of the loophole and caused the plan to fail. Young Master Su, please punish me. Meng Juiguang hurriedly apologized with a face full of regret. Su Lingchong's face was gloomy, and he did not speak for a long time. This time, in order to kill Lin Yi, in order to ensure that nothing went wrong, he had put in a lot of effort and capital. Not only did he come forward to persuade Zhao Hongba, the fourth elder of the Blue Cloud Pavilion, he even did not hesitate to take out a grade 4 Great Recover pill. In the end, not only was Lin Yi completely fine, but he had also obtained a full score of the god level just like last time. All his investment had gone down the drain. This was not the key point. Young Master Su's capital was lost. Even if it was the expensive grade 4 Great Recover pill, he did not care much about it. The key point was that this time, he had lost face in front of Shangguan Laner. 3 days ago, he had already lost face in the law enforcement hall, and now he had lost it again. If this went on, how would he have the face to face Shangguan Laner in the future? Don't forget that his grandfather, Su Yuanjing, had given him a death order to climb up the Shangguan family's high branch. Whether the Su family could truly enter the ranks of the top wealthy families in the future depended on him alone. Looking at Su Lingchong's extremely unsightly expression, Meng Juiguang could not help but feel anxious. He did not even dare to breathe loudly, for fear of provoking young Master Su's anger. Strictly speaking, although they did not succeed in dealing with Lin Yi, Meng Juiguang's performance was commendable. After all, from their point of view, if it wasn't for Lin Yi's powerful and evil defensive martial skill, it would be impossible for anyone else to fail. To put it bluntly, this was not his fault at all. He, Meng Juiguang, could not be blamed for not doing his best. He could only blame Lin Yi for being too strange. But something went wrong. Meng Juiguang was the mastermind behind the plot against Lin Yi. If he didn't take the initiative to apologize, how could young Master Su get off the stage? All right, it's not your fault this time, Elder Meng. So what if Lin Yi escapes this time? He's still a fish on our chopping block. He won't be able to jump around for long. Su Lingchong suppressed the anger in his heart. He patted Meng Juiguang's shoulder comfortingly. After all, Su Lingchong was the future successor of the Su family, taught by Su Yuanjing. He was not a pure hedonistic second generation. He knew that if he wanted to be successful, apart from being able to lose, he also needed to be tolerant. And from Meng Juiguang's previous performance, he was indeed a talent. It was just that he was buried because his background in Blue Cloud Pavilion was too poor. It was just right for him to take him in and use him. Thank you for your magnanimity, young Master Su. Elder Meng will definitely go through water and tread on fire for young Master Su in the future. Meng Juiguang hurriedly flattered and expressed his loyalty. He secretly heaved a sigh of relief. In this way, he could continue to look forward to his position as the third pavilion master. Being able to lose, being tolerant, coupled with his deep background and generous spending, this young Master Su was really a wise leader. Su Lingchong smiled. Then, he sternly instructed, although we have plenty of opportunities to crush Lin Yi like an ant, we still have to learn from this lesson. Next time, before we deal with him, we must first understand his background to avoid any accidents. Meng Juiguang nodded repeatedly. He patted his chest and guaranteed, "Don't worry, young Master Su. This time, When we go back, I will let Ming Tong, Li Jingming, and the others find a way to understand Lin Yi's background to ensure that the next plan is foolproof. Good, then it depends on your performance. Su Lingchong nodded, and his gaze immediately fell on Shanghai Laner in the distance. His headache now was how to explain to this little junior sister why he failed twice in a row. As a dignified young master of Soaring Sky Pavilion, he ended up stumbling in the hands of Lin Yi, a newcomer in the secular world. This matter was really a bit unjustifiable. Fortunately, there were no other young masters present. Otherwise, Su Lingchong would really lose his face. After hesitating for a long time, Su Lingchong braced himself and walked to Shanghai Laner's side. With an embarrassed expression, he whispered, "Little junior sister Lan this time." Because of the lack of information, Lin Yi took advantage of the loophole. But don't worry, next time, he won't be so lucky. Senior brother, I will definitely teach him a good lesson to vent your anger. Humph, Shanghai Laner snorted. Originally, she didn't intend to pay attention to him, but after thinking about it, she still added, "Remember to inform me next time?" Of course, of course. Su Lingchong hurriedly nodded in response. He was afraid that Shanghai Laner would ignore him from then on. As long as this little girl was willing to come out with him, everything would be fine. In this way, he still had to properly thank Lin Yi. Otherwise, it wouldn't be easy to ask this little girl out. This was a good opportunity to take more contact with her, win her heart, and lay a good foundation for him to win her heart in the future. Unbeknownst to him, Shanghai Laner was purely considering for Lin Yi's sake. If Su Lingchong had any plans, she could know in advance and inform Lin Yi. Although it was the same as the previous 2 times, Su Lingchong wouldn't tell her the specific details, but she could still get a general idea, so that Lin Yi could prepare in advance. However, what Shanghai Laner didn't know was that Lin Yi had successfully planted 2 spies in Su Lingchong's group, Zhong Pingliang and Li Jingming. If she was included, then there would be 3 spies. The scale of the intelligence team was simply unprecedented. If Su Lingchong's group could still mess with Lin Yi, then the sun would really rise from the west. In just a short half a day, all the newcomers from the 3 pavilions had completed the assessment. However, the second segment was not over yet. After all, there were so many newcomers who had not recovered from their injuries. Before their injuries were completely healed and they confirmed that they had obtained the corresponding recovery points, according to the rules, they could only stay in the main hall of the Welcome Pavilion. Otherwise, their recovery points would be counted as 0. Chapter 3730. Once fairness was lost, the so-called newcomer assessment would be completely meaningless. This was because, no matter how much effort was put into it, it would be impossible for the newcomers with true potential to stand out. The 3 pavilions had invested so many cultivation resources, it would really be a waste. However, those who had yet to recover from their injuries needed to stay in the Welcome Pavilion to receive supervision. Newcomers like Lin Yi, who had already been examined by Zhao Hongba, were not subject to this restriction. They could return to their cave abodes early to carry out their daily cultivation. In consideration of the newcomers who were more seriously injured in this segment, the 3rd segment of the newcomer assessment would begin in 10 days. Normally, 10 days was enough for a rookie to recover from his injuries, no matter how heavily injured he was. If he had not recovered after 10 days, then the rookie would not have much of a future. So what if it affected his performance in the next round of the assessment? They were all trash anyway, and trash never had human rights. For a newcomer like Lin Yi who had completely recovered on the spot, these 10 days were a very rare opportunity to rest and recuperate. According to the rules of the assessment announced on the announcement, the subsequent segments would not end on the same day like the previous 2 segments. Instead, it would be a rather long battle of attrition. Not only would it consume one's physical strength, but it would also consume one's mental energy. Hence, if one did not take the opportunity to recuperate, it was very likely that unexpected problems would occur. Apart from recuperating, in these 10 days, the ambitious newcomers could also specifically prepare for the next segment of the assessment. Although it was also a last-minute effort, it was better than not doing it at all. However, while the others were smug and preparing for the next segment, Lin Yi did not take this matter to heart. He cultivated when he needed to cultivate, mined when he needed to, His daily routine was exactly the same as before. When the others saw his leisurely manner, apart from feeling envious, they did not dare to say anything to mock him. After all, he had 2 god-level full marks in his hands. His superhuman strength had been completely revealed. Naturally, he had the capital to be leisurely. At this time, if they still mocked him like before, it would only mean that they were idiots. In these 10 days, Lin Yi also received information from Li Zhengming, Meng Jueguang, and his gang plan to use all sorts of methods to understand his strength in the next segment of the assessment. He had to think of all kinds of ways to figure out the ins and outs of his strength, especially this defensive martial skill that he had hidden so deeply. Defensive martial technique? When he first received the report, Lin Yi was completely stunned. It was only after he read Li Zhengming's explanation of why this group of people came up with this speculation that he came back to his senses. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It was clearly a stroke of genius. In the end, people thought that he had purposely hidden a strong defensive martial technique. The development of this matter was a little strange, making Lin Yi blush with shame. However, this was also good. Meng Jueguang and the others thought that after they figured out the reason, they would no longer question why he was able to withstand the 130% power of the early stage of foundation establishment. This way, at least Lin Yi's true strength would not be exposed, which was a good thing. As for the so-called defensive martial skill, since this group of people like to guess like this, then let them guess. The more they guessed, the better. Maybe when the time came, Lin Yi wouldn't even need to do anything. They would guess it themselves, and it would save a lot of trouble. In addition, what Lin Yi had to do every day was to go to the Spirit Jade Hall to dig in the mines during the day and steal 2 or 3 pieces of waste jade. At night, he would come back to continue cultivating and consolidate the strength of the early stage of foundation establishment. However, before entering the next segment of the assessment, there was still an important event waiting in front of Lin Yi. The monthly open day of the inner street had finally arrived. Since the last time he saw the star inkstone at the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Lin Yi had been thinking about it and made all sorts of preparations for it. After all, this damn thing was once one of the strongest people in the entire Heavenly Island. Something that even he had to look up to was definitely not an ordinary thing. Lin Yi was naturally determined to get it. However, thinking of the last time he met the inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion who was similarly interested in the star inkstone at the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Lin Yi couldn't help but feel a little apprehensive. Although the star inkstone's price of 1,000 spirit jades was enough to make most people shrink back, and because of its unattractive appearance, very few people would pay attention to it. Even less people would spend so many spirit jades to buy a broken stone of no use at all. However, there were still people in the world who knew what was good for them, such as that inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. Judging from his performance at that time, this inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion should not have enough spirit jades on him. Moreover, although he was from the Soaring Sky Pavilion, apart from young masters like Su Lingchong who had an extremely deep background, 1,000 spirit jades was still a huge sum of money for the majority of the inner disciples of the Soaring Sky Pavilion. It was not that easy to gather. However, if one really wanted to do it, if one was really determined to get it, it might not be impossible to gather 1,000 spirit jades. At least, Lin Yi had heard from senior brother Ku by that some of the inner disciples of the 3 great pavilions were privately taking loans at high interest. If one went through this route, although the price was huge, and could even be said to be absolutely disastrous, it was not difficult to gather 1,000 spirit jades. Lin Yi didn't know whether that inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion was as determined to get it as he was, and even more so didn't know how determined that person would be for the star inkstone. However, at this moment, he already felt an indescribable pressure. If that person really gritted his teeth and gathered 1,000 spirit jades, and if that person had the right to freely enter and exit the inner streets, unlike him who had to wait for the inner streets to be opened, then he would really miss the opportunity to obtain the star inkstone. Moreover, an entire month had already passed. Apart from that person, could there be other competitors who knew what was good for them? Perhaps that piece of star inkstone had already fallen into someone else's hands? For a moment, Lin Yi actually felt a little worried about his personal gains and losses. However, he immediately reacted and laughed in spite of himself. If I get it, I'll be lucky. If I don't, it's my fate. Regardless of whether I can get it or not, as long as I do my best, there's nothing to regret. After calculating the date, in the wee hours of the inner streets being open to the public, Lin Yi put on the 1,000-thread mask and left under the stars and the moon. He planned to rush to the Hong Merchant Guild to snatch the star inkstone as soon as the inner streets were open to the public. If he arrived and discovered that the star inkstone had already been bought by someone else, then he could only say that this was his fate and that he was not the fated person for the star inkstone. Chapter 37-31. However, though the inner street wasn't open to the public yet, the outer and middle streets already had many vendors opening their stalls. Though there weren't many customers right now, to these vendors, the market wasn't just a place to sell their wares. To some extent, it was also a place to purchase goods. The so-called purchase meant that many people would sell some of the heavenly materials and earthly treasures they had obtained through various channels to the merchants in the outer and middle streets at a price slightly lower than the market price. These merchants could then resell the treasures to others in the following market transactions and earn the difference in price. The reason why these people didn't directly set up their stalls in the market and sell their wares to customers at a higher price was because they had their own concerns. First of all, they weren't traditional vendors. They weren't popular in the market and they didn't have much credibility. Even if they set up their stalls, they may not be able to sell their wares in a short amount of time. Secondly, the methods they used to obtain treasures of heaven and earth were usually not so legitimate. If they were to be displayed in broad daylight, it was very likely to cause trouble for them. At that time, once they were targeted in the marketplace, it would be difficult for them to escape. Therefore, to these people, instead of setting up their own stalls, it was more convenient to sell their wares to the vendors here. Though the price would be lower, they would be able to get spiritual jades at the same time. This would save them a lot of unnecessary trouble. Therefore, a unique phenomenon formed in the market. Most of the vendors would set up their stalls very early in the morning. But before the sun rose, they wouldn't sell their wares and would only purchase their wares. The reason why they set their stalls at midnight, a time when there were very few people, was for the sake of secrecy. The people who sold their wares needed to be as inconspicuous as possible, and the vendors didn't want to be surrounded by people when they were purchasing their wares. Because if they did, their bottom price would be leaked. It would be very difficult to do business. Looking at the busy scene, Lin Yi suddenly had an idea. If he wanted to buy something, he could choose this time to buy it before these people sold their wares to the vendors. If he intercepted their wares in advance, the price would be much cheaper than buying them in the market. However, on second thought, this idea wasn't very reliable. After all, these people had their own network of connections. Even if you had a lot of spiritual jades in your hands, they wouldn't necessarily be willing to sell their treasures to you. They might not even be willing to sell their treasures to you directly. Who knows if you are reliable? To dispose of stolen goods, one had to be reliable. People would definitely choose a familiar face and not a stranger. However, although this occasion wasn't suitable for buying things, it was suitable for selling things. And Lin Yi suddenly remembered that in his jade pendant space, there was really a pile of good things that could be exchanged for spiritual jades. This item was the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard that he had hunted in the outskirts of the back mountain. Although it wasn't a rare heavenly treasure, as a rare early-stage Foundation establishment spirit beast, its carcass was no less valuable than a heavenly treasure. He should be able to sell it for a good price. However, the most valuable part of the corpse, the inner core, had already been dug out by Lin Yi in advance. It was not because he wanted to use it, but because the ghost had asked for it. As a senior who lived in the space of his jade pendant, Lin Yi naturally agreed to such a small request from the ghost and took it out without hesitation. However, the ghost did not say what it wanted the inner core for. It only asked Lin Yi to take it out and temporarily store it for it. That was all. Seeing that it was still early, Lin Yi turned around and went to a secluded place with no one around. He took out the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard from the space of the jade pendant and dragged it out from the corner. Although the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard was heavy, weighing more than a ton, It was not difficult for a peak early-stage foundation establishment expert like Lin Yi to carry it. However, the commotion he made along the way was not small and quickly attracted the attention of the people in the marketplace. "This is the nine-tailed cloud leopard?" Those with good eyesight quickly recognized it and gasped. Admittedly, to the cultivators in the marketplace, the nine-tailed cloud leopard was only at the early foundation establishment stage and was not very strong. However, this was a famous and extremely cunning, ferocious beast of the forest. This kind of spiritual beast was famous for its cunning and ferocity. If one wanted to hunt it in the deep forest of the back mountain, even an expert at the peak of the early stage of the foundation establishment realm wouldn't be able to do it, let alone an expert at the early stage of the foundation establishment realm. In theory, to hunt such a cunning, ferocious beast would require at least 2 mid-stage foundation establishment experts. In addition, they would have to spend a great deal of patience and energy in the deep forests of the mountains. Only then would they have a chance of successfully killing it. It would not be an exaggeration to say that among all early foundation establishment spiritual beasts, the nine-tailed cloud leopard was not only one of the strongest, it was also the most troublesome, ferocious beast to deal with. Many times, even mid-stage foundation establishment experts would not be willing to provoke it. Spirit traders in the marketplace. There were quite a few merchants in the market. Every day, one could see the corpses of all kinds of spiritual beasts being dragged here to be sold. However, the nine-tailed cloud leopard was extremely rare. In the eyes of the merchants in the marketplace, the nine-tailed cloud leopard's strength could not be considered high, but in terms of rarity, it could definitely be ranked in the top 5. Moreover, the nine-tailed cloud leopard's entire body was a treasure. Whether it was the bones or the internal organs, every part of it was a real treasure. This was a rare and highly sought-after commodity. For a moment, Lin Yi unexpectedly became the focus of all the spirit traders. Some of them even impatiently crowded around him, afraid that others in the same trade would beat them to it. After all, the nine-tailed cloud leopard was a rare resource that could be used to establish a brand. It was something that could only be encountered by chance. If they missed this opportunity, they would never be able to find another shop like this one. "Brother, how are you going to sell this nine-tailed cloud leopard? Are you going to sell it as a whole or retail sale?" Seeing that other merchants were hurrying over, a bearded, middle-aged man closest to Linny hurriedly asked, "Oh, what about selling it as a whole? What about retail?" Linny raised his eyebrows and asked without batting an eyelid, "If you sell it as a whole, then you sell it as a whole at a fixed price. If you sell it as a retail, then you have to separate the body parts and sell them one by one according to their value." The bearded, middle-aged man paused for a moment, then asked, "Brother, you look unfamiliar. You don't come to this marketplace often, do you?" Chapter 37-32. Then I suggest you do a better job. Although the price will be higher if you sell it at retail, you're not familiar with the people here, so you might not be able to sell it all in a short time. Brother, you also know that although the carcass of this early-stage foundation establishment spirit beast doesn't decay that fast, once it's cut open, the spiritual energy will quickly dissipate. After a long time, it will depreciate. What do you think, brother? The middle-aged bearded man analyzed with a sincere look on his face. Moreover, it's illegal to sell the carcasses of spirit beasts in private. Without a strong background, it'll be troublesome if the spirit beasts of the South Island find out about it. Of course, brother, you don't have to be afraid of trouble. I'm just reminding you. Oh, let me think about it. Linny responded noncommittally, but he didn't directly answer how he wanted to sell it. Although this middle-aged bearded man spoke very sincerely, and it sounded like it was true, he was a merchant here after all. He couldn't appear too impatient when dealing with merchants, especially when there were many merchants coming over to ask for a price. If he rashly gave the other party any promises now, it would be difficult to sell it at a higher price later. Seeing Lin Yi's unshakable expression, the middle-aged bearded man could only sigh helplessly. He originally thought that Linny was unfamiliar, so he wanted to trick Linny into selling it to him at a fixed price before the others. As long as Linny nodded slightly, according to the rules of the market, others wouldn't be able to compete with him at a higher price even if they wanted to. Unfortunately, Although Linny was young, he had seen enough of these things, so he wouldn't be easily fooled. In less than a moment, the number of merchants who surrounded Lin E to express their interest in the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard had reached 5 or 6. Linny smiled secretly. This could practically be a small auction. However, this was a good thing. With so many people competing with each other, at least he didn't have to worry about losing out. Seeing that almost everyone had arrived, Linny didn't want to delay any longer and make too much noise. After all, he still had important matters to attend to. He immediately cupped his hands towards these merchants and said, "Everyone, I intend to sell this nine-tailed cloud leopard carcass. If you're interested, please name a price." According to the market rules, the highest bidder wins. The reason why he chose to sell them in bulk instead of retail was naturally to save time. Otherwise, he might not be able to sell them all even if he stayed here for a whole day, let alone finishing within an hour before the inner street opened. Furthermore, even if it was not because he was in a hurry, Lin E would not covet this little bit of spiritual jade simply because he wanted to keep his identity a secret. After all, there was only 1,000 silk mask. If this face was recognized by others, it would not be easy to use it to hide one's identity in the future. The merchants looked at each other, their eyes filled with helplessness. Although it was a common market rule that the highest bidder wins, as sellers, they were very happy to see such a scene. But now, they were in the position of the buyer, which was somewhat disadvantageous to them. Because if they were to fight to the death, the one who would benefit in the end would not be any one of them, but only Lin E, the seller. And yet, even though they knew that this wasn't a good deal, they could only grit their teeth and continue. After all, this nine-tailed cloud-piercing panther was a strategic and rare resource. If they just ignored it and allowed it to be bought by others in the same trade, then in the future, a large number of their customers might be snatched away. That would be a truly disastrous loss. Originally, Linny had just thought that this corpse was useless to him, and that piling it up in the jade pendant space was a waste of space. As such, he might as well sell it for some spiritual jades. From the very start, he had never expected that this situation would be so advantageous. It seemed that his luck today wasn't bad. He should be able to earn quite a bit of spiritual jades, which would be just enough for him to go to the inner street and compete for that piece of staring stone. "Brother, before bidding, can we first inspect the corpse to see if it's intact?" one of the merchants asked. Linny nodded. "Of course. Apart from the nidin, which I've already taken out, I haven't touched any other parts. You can inspect it yourselves." All of the merchants present were experienced people. Whether or not the corpse had been tampered with, they only needed to casually flip it over to see. There was no way it could be hidden from their eyes and ears. After flipping through the corpse, they nodded in satisfaction. Normally speaking, the most important and valuable part of a spirit beast's corpse was its nidin. Once the nidin was dug out, while the other parts weren't completely worthless, their value would drop by at least half. But to these merchants, who weren't interested in this, as long as the corpse was intact enough to prove that it was a cloud nine-tailed panther, they would be able to use this as a pretext to obtain their eyeballs. That was enough. As for whether or not the nidin was still there, that was actually a secondary problem. Because in the end, even if it was a cloud nine-tailed panther's nidin, it was only an early-stage foundation establishment nidin. It was essentially no different from the nidin of other spirit beasts of the same level. Although it wasn't cheap, it wasn't all that rare. However, these people were, after all, merchants. They definitely wouldn't pass up on an opportunity to haggle. Although the corpse of a cloud nine-tailed panther is relatively rare, because its nidin has already been dug out, the price has to be reduced by quite a bit. How about this? I'll bid 80 spirit jades. 80 spirit jades? Linny raised his eyebrows without batting an eyelid, but he didn't say anything. The last 2 times he had come to the market square, he had seen the prices of some spirit beast corpses. Spirit beasts at the early stage foundation establishment stage were generally priced at more than 100 spirit jades. Furthermore, they were all corpses without nadins. For a rare commodity like the cloud nine-tailed panther, even if these merchants wanted to make a profit, there was no way they would lower the price to such a low price. A price of 80 spirit jades was simply bullying a layman like him. Although Linny didn't say anything, His disapproval was already very clear. The merchant who had just bid couldn't help but curse at his miscalculation. He wanted nothing more than to slap himself in the face on the spot. Out of a professional habit, he had subconsciously wanted to squeeze as much as possible out of Lin Yi. He hadn't reacted in time. With so many people in the same trade as him, this wasn't a situation where he could lower the price. It was more like raising the price. Chapter 37-33. With just one sentence, the surrounding merchants immediately glared at him, especially the merchant who had just made a bid. His face was flushed red, but he seemed to be quite afraid of this middle-aged bearded man. He only dared to be angry, but did not dare to say anything. 150 spiritual jades? Lin Yi's heart stirred. This price could not be considered low. At least, among all the early Foundation Establishment realm spirit beast carcasses he had seen before, this was already the highest price. This bearded middle-aged man was indeed quite straightforward. Seeing that Lin Yi was a little tempted, the other merchant beside him couldn't help but become anxious. He hurriedly said, "I'll pay 160 spirit jades." The bearded middle-aged man glanced at the man, and without even lifting his eyelids, he immediately raised the price, 180 spirit jades. When the others saw how wealthy and confident he was, they all felt helpless. Although the carcass of a nine-tailed cloud leopard was extremely rare, it was still an early-stage Foundation Establishment realm spirit beast. This price had already exceeded the upper limit. If they raised the price even more, even if they managed to get their hands on it, even if they successfully sold it, they wouldn't be able to make much profit. They would just be working for Lin Yi, a stranger they had never met before. But even so, a merchant gritted his teeth and increased the price. "I bid 185 spiritual jades." However, before Lin Yi could react, the bearded middle-aged man immediately called out, 200 spirit jades. With that, all the other merchants stopped talking. If he were to purchase the corpse of an early Foundation Establishment spirit beast for more than 200 spirit jades, even if it was an extremely rare cloud-piercing panther, it would be a loss. It would be impossible for him to make any profit. Even Lin Yi couldn't help but think highly of this bearded middle-aged man. To be honest, the first impression that this person gave him was that he was a typical businessman. He seemed sincere and enthusiastic, but in fact, he was secretly scheming. Who knew when he would be ripped off by him? But now, it seemed that even if this person was a businessman, he was also a bold one. For the corpse of a cloud-piercing panther without a Niden, he dared to offer a high price of 200 spirit jades without batting an eyelid, making his competitors speechless. This kind of boldness was not something an ordinary person could have. Lin Yi looked at the other people's faces, and he was sure that they wouldn't be bidding anymore. Just as he was about to make his decision, a passerby sighed and looked at Lin Yi. "This is a rare item. It's hard to come by. It's a pity to sell it." Lin Yi couldn't help but be stunned, and he carefully sized up this person. His appearance was ordinary, and his clothes were rather sloppy and ordinary. It could even be said to be shabby, and his strength couldn't be considered to be very strong. He only looked like he was at the peak of the early stage of Foundation Establishment, so he was not conspicuous at all in the crowd. However, after taking a closer look, Lin Yi realized that this person's temperament was rather different from others. It was not the temperament of a genius, but the temperament of a scientist who persistently studied something all year round. If he had to find someone around him as an example, this person gave Lin Yi the feeling. He was somewhat similar to Han Jingjing. Although Han Jingjing was a little muddle-headed in her daily life and didn't seem to have any special talents, when it came to alchemy, her talent could be said to be unprecedented. If she really developed, she could even belong to the kind of phenomenal existence that could turn the entire alchemy world upside down and lead the future of change. And this ordinary-looking person in front of him also had such an extraordinary temperament. It was just that his talent might not necessarily be in alchemy. Before Lin Yi could speak, the middle-aged bearded man beside him became anxious. He glared at this person and said unhappily, "Trash King, you poor fellow, what nonsense are you spouting? I offered 200 spirit jades to buy this brother's cloud-piercing panther corpse, and you actually say it's a pity? If you have the ability, then give me a higher price. Let alone 200 spirit jades. You probably can't even take out 20 spirit jades. The person called Trash King immediately became embarrassed. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, he couldn't help but wave his hands in embarrassment and say, I'm not saying that selling it for 200 spirit jades is a pity. The price of 200 spirit jades is indeed very high, but some things can only be found by chance and are priceless. If the front claws and tail of the cloud-piercing panther were used to forge weapons, the value of the forged weapons would be at least over 2,000 spirit jades. TCH, you're just bluffing. With your Trash King skills, you can forge weapons worth 2,000 spirit jades? Who are you trying to fool? The middle-aged bearded man glared at him, then turned to Lin Yi and explained, Brother, don't listen to this kid's crazy talk. This kid is the most unpopular inner disciple of Blue Cloud Pavilion. His name is Wang Lanpa, and he doesn't know how to do anything but forge weapons. He even calls himself a master blacksmith. He often buys the leftover bits and pieces of spirit beast corpses from us, but he's never forged anything decent. They're all a pile of trash, so we always call him Trash King. Listening to the middle-aged bearded man's introduction, the Trash King was so anxious that his face turned red. He hurriedly explained, That's because you guys don't know anything about blacksmithing. When it comes to blacksmithing, quality trumps everything else. A true master blacksmith will use the worst materials to forge the best weapons. As for the success rate, it's only secondary. I'm just a little lower. As far as I know, you've never truly forged a weapon successfully, have you? How dare you say that your success rate is just a little lower? The middle-aged bearded man and the others who knew about this guy burst into laughter. Blacksmithing masters only talk about quality, not success rate. What do you amateurs know? The Trash King continued to defend himself with a flushed face. However, judging from the reactions of the crowd, it was obvious that his efforts were in vain. Lin Yi, who was watching coldly from the sidelines, could not help but smile when he saw this. This Trash King was an interesting person. He was like the Kong Iji of the cultivation world. Just as the crowd was teasing the Trash King, Lin Yi suddenly asked, Brother Wang, did you just say that the front claws and tail of the nine-tailed cloud leopard are good materials for forging weapons? The crowd was stunned. They stared at Lin Yi strangely and exchanged glances with one another. Does this guy really believe the Trash King's nonsense? Chapter 37-34. Unfortunately, before Lin Yi officially agreed to sell the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard, he could do whatever he wanted with it. No one else had the right to intervene. Therefore, even if the middle-aged bearded man was full of anger, he could only vent his anger on the Jinx King of Junk. Seeing that Lin Yi seemed to believe his words, the King of Junk suddenly became spirited. He nodded repeatedly without caring about other people's expressions. It's definitely a good material that can only be found by chance. If it can be used to cast weapons, its value will definitely be far more than 200 spiritual jades. Thank you for your advice. Lin Yi pondered for a moment, then turned to the middle-aged bearded man and said, I'm sorry. I plan to keep the front paw and the tail for my own use, and sell the rest as a whole. Do you still want to buy it? Of course, the price can be lower. Don't forget, Lin Yi was also a blacksmith, just like the King of Junk in front of him. It was just that he didn't have a master, no information, and no crafting scroll, so he couldn't try. Now, after hearing the King of Junk's reminder, he suddenly had an idea. Instead of selling the front paw and the tail, he might as well keep them for his own use. He couldn't find a blacksmith in the secular world before, but this was the Heaven Stage Island. As long as he was willing, it wasn't difficult to find information about blacksmithing, and he might even have the chance to become a real blacksmith in the future. The King of Junk in front of him, who claimed to be a blacksmith master, was the proof. Hearing Lin Yi's suggestion, the middle-aged bearded man frowned, but then he patted his chest and said with a forthright expression, Anyway, I'm buying the carcass of the nine-tailed cloud leopard to make a signboard, not to sell it. You can keep the front paw and the tail if you want, as long as the rest can be used as a signboard. But as for the spiritual jades, I'll still give you 200 spiritual jades. Just treat it as making a friend. I, Chen Heihu, won't be so stingy over such a small amount of spiritual jades. Chen Heihu? Lin was a little surprised. My surname is Chen. Heihu is the nickname given to me by the people in the market. How about it? It fits my image, doesn't it? How should I address you, brother? Chen Heihu laughed and deliberately stroked his thick beard. Hee hee. Thank you very much. My name is Lin Air. Linny nodded and casually came up with an alias that he had never used before. Chen Heihu nodded and immediately ordered a servant beside him to cut off the front claws and tail of the cloud-piercing leopard. At the same time, he picked out 200 pieces of good jade full of spiritual energy and handed them to Lin Yi. Brother Chen Heihu, since my cloud leopard's body isn't complete, it's not a very good one. You're very generous, giving me 200 spirit jades, but I can't just accept it like that. Lin Yi waved his hand. I saw it in your friend's backpack, but I can't accept it just like that. There are also some spiritual jades of poor quality. Why don't you give me those spiritual jades? Chen Heihu stared blankly. He didn't expect Lin Yi to not be a greedy person. He did have some spirit jades of poor quality. You can't pick your customers when you're doing business, right? You have to take whatever people give you. Of course, those spiritual jades were usually given in threes. If it was just one, he wouldn't do it. Chen Heihu thought for a moment and said, there's no need for that. Those spiritual jades aren't of good quality and aren't full of spiritual energy. Since we're brothers, I naturally can't cheat you. Although this exchange would save him a lot of money. He could save a lot of money, but he was a straightforward person, so he didn't care about that. That's right, that's why I'm doing this, Linny said resolutely. Otherwise, I won't be able to do business with you next time. Seeing Lin Yi's determination, Chen Heihu could only nod and say, then I'll take advantage of you this time. Brother Lin, if you hunt any spirit beasts in the future, you must take care of me. Don't worry. The price will definitely satisfy you. The reason why he was so straightforward before, apart from needing the nine-tailed cloud-piercing leopard, was because he wanted to make friends with Lin Yi. Of course, now he felt that not only was Lin Yi's strength superb, but his character was also very good. Because Lin Yi didn't intentionally hide his strength, Chen Heihu could clearly feel that Lin Yi was only an expert in the early stage of the foundational realm. He wasn't considered strong on Heaven Stage Island, where foundational realm experts were everywhere. However, the more it was like this, the more precious Lin Yi was. It wasn't rare for an expert in the middle stage of the foundational realm to be able to hunt a nine-tailed cloud-piercing leopard. However, for an expert in the early stage of the foundational realm, it was as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Those who could do this were all geniuses among men. As a shrewd and experienced businessman, Chen Heihu had his own way of looking at people. He knew who had a bright future and needed to befriend as much as possible, and who didn't have a bright future to look at. In his eyes, Lin Yi was naturally the former, while the tattered king was the latter. Of course, Lin Yi nodded. In the future, he would have to deal with all kinds of powerful spiritual beasts. If he hunted and killed any spiritual beasts, he could sell them to Chen Heihu to save himself some trouble. After chatting with Chen Heihu for a while, Lin Yi saw that the sky was getting brighter. It was almost time for the back street to open. Lin Yi immediately said goodbye and left. However, after a few steps, he suddenly felt that someone was following him. Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that someone was greedy for money? Although 200 spiritual jade was not a lot, it was enough for some people to take the risk. Under the cover of the gradually increasing crowd, Lin Yi turned around and observed for a while. Then he found that the person following him was the tattered king. Lin Yi was puzzled. Why was this guy following him? Did he really want to kill him? But it didn't look like it. Judging by the strength of this guy, he was definitely not strong among the experts in the early stage of the foundational realm. He shouldn't be so daring as to target him, right? Seeing that Lin Yi had noticed him, the tattered king quickly walked up to him. After a moment of hesitation, he plucked up his courage and asked, Brother Lin, what do you plan to do with the front claws and tail of the nine-tailed cloud-piercing leopard? Lin Yi was even more puzzled. I can use my own things however I want. Why should I tell an outsider I don't know? Chapter 37-35. Lin Yi nodded. It was easy to understand. In theory, being a blacksmith was even more expensive than being an alchemist. It was normal for an inner disciple of Blue Cloud Pavilion, like the worn-out king, to be unable to cook without rice. Pausing for a moment, the tattered king took a deep breath and stared at Lin Yi with a burning gaze. The front claws and tail of the Cloud Nine-tailed leopard are both rare materials that can only be found by luck. If second brother Lin trusts me, you can come to Clear Cloud Pavilion anytime. I'm willing to forge weapons for you for free. I see. Only then did Lin Yi figure out the worn-out king's intention. He did not reply immediately. Instead, he asked, "May I know where your master is? Is there a place in the 3 pavilions that specializes in training blacksmiths?" The worn-out king was stunned for a moment. He replied, "No, blacksmiths are a very unpopular profession. As far as I know, there aren't many serious blacksmiths in the North Island, but there are quite a few in the Middle Island. As for my master, I learned from a blacksmith master named Sun Sikong by chance for a few days. The rest is what I learned from the materials. Don't worry, I can't boast about anything else, but I'm definitely good at forging weapons." Can't boast about anything? Lin Yi could not help but laugh. But Chen Heihu and the others just said that you've never succeeded in forging weapons? The worn-out king choked. No matter how much he thought of himself as a blacksmith genius, it was a bloody fact. That was why people called him the worn-out king. "I believe you'll succeed. If there's a chance in the future, I'll come to Blue Cloud Pavilion to look for you." Lin Yi smiled at him. He had a good impression of the worn-out king. He could tell that the worn-out king was a guy with real skills. However, even if he only had the worst materials, he still insisted on forging top-notch weapons. It would be a miracle if he could succeed in forging weapons with such a weird philosophy. In any case, the front claws and tail of the Cloud Nine-tailed leopard were useless in his hands. If he had the time in the future, he might as well look for this fellow and study it together. Perhaps they could really forge something decent. Are you really willing to believe me? The king of junk was overjoyed. Originally, he didn't have any expectations for this matter. He just didn't want these good casting materials to be wasted, but he didn't expect Lin Yi to agree. One had to know that although the profession of being a blacksmith had always been sought after, there were only a handful of people who could truly live up to this title. For a blacksmith like the king of junk who had never forged a decent weapon, he was a complete joke in the eyes of others. No one would take his words seriously. It was even more impossible for them to hand over their rare materials to him, not even if the king of junk volunteered to forge for free. Because once these materials were used to forge, there would only be 2 results. Either they succeeded and became a part of the divine weapon, or they failed. From then on, it became a pile of trash and no longer had any value. With the king of junk's embarrassing history, how could he succeed? Only a ghost would believe him. Oh, even a ghost would not believe him. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that out of 10,000 people, 9,999 people would not believe in the king of junk's ability. However, he was lucky today. He met the last person who was willing to believe in him. To him, this was probably the last straw to clutch at. If he couldn't seize this opportunity to clear his name, he might have to spend the rest of his life with this embarrassing title of King of Rags. Seeing that Lin Yi nodded affirmatively, the king of junk was so excited that he couldn't speak coherently. Then, "Thank you so much. Brother Lin, don't worry, I'll definitely forge something good for you. I won't waste these great materials. Whenever you're free, come find me at the Blue Cloud Pavilion. I'll be waiting for you." "All right, I've got some urgent matters to attend to at the moment. I'll be counting on you when the time comes," Lin Yi responded. Although he believed that the king of junk had the ability to forge weapons. After all, the guy's embarrassing 0 success rate was right in front of him. He had to be careful. If he handed the materials to the king of junk hastily, it might really go to waste. Therefore, even though he had promised the king of junk to help him forge weapons, Lin Yi decided to follow him throughout the process. He could also observe and learn how to forge weapons. No matter what, the king of junk was a proper blacksmith. His attainments in the aspect of blacksmithing were much more profound than that of a layman like Zhang Tai, who had to fumble around by himself. After all, although Lin Yi had repaired the godly pesticide cauldron, expanded the space of the jade pendant, made the essence necklace, and forged the heaven-level heavenly weapon by himself, these could not be considered as real forging weapons. If he wanted to forge a real heavenly weapon by himself, he still had to put in the effort and learn systematically. That was because forging weapons was not based on a blueprint. It required creation and combining different materials into one. It was not simply based on a blueprint. There were thousands of materials in the world. If everyone could forge the same heavenly weapon, what would be the difference? In this aspect, no matter how bad the reputation of the King of Junk was, he was qualified to be Lin Yi's teacher. Lin Yi would definitely benefit a lot from observing and learning together. However, although he had agreed to it, Lin Yi estimated that it would take at least a few months to ask the King of Junk for help. That was because the time spent on forging weapons was far more than that on refining elixirs. It could easily take a few months, or even 8 to 10 years. Moreover, Lin Yi had to deal with the newcomer's assessment in the Welcome Pavilion. He did not have that much free time. Therefore, he could only wait until the matter was over. Well, it's okay, Brother Lin. You can do as you please. The patience of a blacksmith is not for show. I can wait no matter how long it takes. The King of Junk did not care at all and kept nodding. For him, it was already a great thing that Lin Yi had agreed to let him forge weapons for him. As for waiting for a period of time, it was not a problem at all. He could wait no matter how long it took. At this moment, the King of Junk even began to think about which auxiliary materials to match the front claws and whiptail of the nine-tailed cloud-piercing bag. Although it was very difficult for him to get anything good with his ability, if he could use some of the scraps in the corner well, it could also have an unexpected magical effect. This was where his core value as an armament master was reflected. Chapter 3736. What an eccentric scientist. Lin Yi couldn't help but laugh. Not only was he not offended, he even thought more highly of this guy because of this. After all, the profession of forging weapons was the same as alchemy. It was necessary to study hard. The more one could calm down and think deeply, the more likely he was to make a breakthrough. The eccentric character of the King of Junk might not be suitable for dealing with people, but it was not necessarily a bad thing for a forging weapon master. Lin Yi smiled and immediately ignored him. He turned around and walked to a secluded corner. After putting the bag of spirit jade and the front paw and tail of the cloud-piercing leopard into the space of the jade pendant, he then walked towards the inner street. At this time, it was just in the middle of the morning. When Lin Yi walked to the entrance of the inner street, the guards had just moved out the sign for the inner street to signal the people who had been waiting here for a long time to enter. With the first batch of people pouring into the inner street, Lin Yi went straight to the Hong Chamber of Commerce. He couldn't wait to know whether the piece of star inkstone he had been longing for was still there. He entered the attic of the Hong Chamber of Commerce with familiarity, quickly walked up to the second floor, and went straight to the corner where he had found the star inkstone last time. However, when Lin Yi glanced at it, his heart immediately sank. The display case was empty, and the star inkstone was gone. Was he going to miss the opportunity in the end, even though he had rushed over so quickly? Lin Yi smiled bitterly. Although he was unwilling, there was no other way. He was going to walk around casually and then go back. After all, it was his luck to get it, but it was his fate to lose it. He had already been mentally prepared for this. However, just as he was about to give up, he suddenly caught a glimpse of a staff member of the Hong Chamber of Commerce carrying an exquisite wooden box as he passed by. The mysterious aura emanating from the wooden box caused his heart to palpitate involuntarily. This situation was exactly the same as when he had discovered the star ink stone. Could it be that the star ink stone was in the wooden box? Lin Yi suddenly had a strong intuition. He hurriedly followed the footsteps of the staff, and then found that the box had been sent to a private room on the side. The last time Lin Yi came here, he had specifically asked around and found out that this private room was a place on the second floor that was specially used to trade valuables. After all, wealth should not be exposed. Some precious treasures that were worth hundreds or even thousands of spirit jades should be traded in a secret place, no matter if it was due to sentiment or reason. If it was placed in a crowded public place like the lobby on the first floor, it would easily attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. The Hong Chamber of Commerce was rich and powerful, so there was nothing to be afraid of. However, customers who had spent a large sum of spiritual jades might not have such confidence. If someone were to follow and launch a sneak attack after leaving the Hong Clan Merchant Association, not only would their treasures be stolen, but they would also be wasting a large amount of spiritual jades. In serious cases, they might even be killed. This was no laughing matter. Therefore, for the sake of protecting the customer's privacy, the Hong Chamber of Commerce had specially set up this private room specifically for the trading of valuable items. If a customer had his eye on any valuable treasure outside, he could just go in and discuss the deal with the shopkeeper. The staff of the Hong Chamber of Commerce would help him pack it up, and no outsiders would be able to see what was inside and have any ill intentions. The door to the private room was not tightly shut. It was only ajar. After all, as a businessman, they had to open their doors to welcome customers from all over the world. They could not possibly close down their other businesses just to protect the customer's privacy. That was unrealistic. To be able to specially set up a private room to help customers avoid unnecessary trouble, the Hong Chamber of Commerce was already very considerate. Through the ajar door, Lin Yi immediately saw a familiar figure inside, and his heart skipped a beat. This figure. It was the inner disciple of the soaring sky pavilion that he had seen last time. Although he was dressed in ordinary clothes instead of the iconic attire of the soaring sky pavilion, Lin Yi could still tell that this person was the same person as the one from last time. If he had only guessed that the wooden box might contain a star inkstone, then now, after seeing this competitor, Lin Yi was already completely certain that the contents of this wooden box were undoubtedly the star inkstone. Immediately after, Lin Yi heard the shopkeeper say to this person, "You can open it and check to see if it is what you want. If you are interested, then according to the previous price, it will be 1,000 spirit jades." Due to the large amount of spirit jades, the Hong Chamber of Commerce can send someone to your residence to collect it. 1,000 spirit jades, it was indeed a star inkstone. Lin Yi's heart jumped. After taking a deep breath, he walked into the private room before that person could finalize the deal with the shopkeeper. "Dear customer, what can I do for you?" The shopkeeper immediately turned and smiled at Lin Yi. Although he still had to take care of the deal with this person, this did not prevent him from entertaining Lin Yi. After all, anyone who had the confidence to enter a private room was a nouveau riche with a large amount of spirit jades in their hands. They were the gods of wealth that merchants like them needed to focus on entertaining and winning over. Before Lin Yi could reply, this inner sect disciple of the soaring sky pavilion looked at him warily. Lin Yi recognized this person without a doubt. This person was the competitor for the star inkstone that he had seen last time, Yu Zhi. After glancing at Lin Yi, Yu Zhi also quickly recognized Lin Yi's identity. His heart was instantly filled with shock. He knew that since Lin Yi had appeared here at this time, his intentions were most likely the same as his own. He had also come for the star inkstone. Taking advantage of the fact that Lin Yi's gaze had yet to fall upon the wooden box, he quickly and calmly closed the lid, not wanting Lin Yi to see that the box contained a star inkstone. Although in his eyes, Lin Yi was nothing more than a poor wandering cultivator, and in theory, it was impossible for him to have so many spirit jades to purchase the star inkstone. Since Lin Yi had dared to enter this private room, it meant that he most likely had some confidence. Just in case, it was better to cover it up a little. After all, if Lin Yi really did discover the star inkstone in the wooden box and wanted to compete with him on the spot, that would be somewhat troublesome. Unbeknownst to him, Lin Yi had long since determined that the wooden box contained the star inkstone. At this time, no matter how much he tried to cover it up, it would be futile. However, Lin Yi's expression did not change, and he did not even glance in his direction. Instead, he directly said to the shopkeeper, "Shopkeeper, I saw a piece of star inkstone here last time. Do you still have it in stock?" When these words came out, the originally somewhat nervous Yu Zhi's heart immediately trembled. What he feared had really come. Being asked such a question by this fellow Lin Yi, how could a wily old fox like the shopkeeper, who had spent many years in the sea of business, not be unable to detect the business opportunity here? Chapter 37:37. This time, No matter how much Yuzha tried to hide it, it was useless. Looking at the shopkeeper's excited expression, looking at Lin Yi's loathsome face, he wanted to slap himself across the face. If he had known that someone like this would suddenly appear, he would not have said another word and immediately sealed the deal. There would have been no need to drag his feet and have someone bring the item over to inspect it. Now, he had been too smart for his own good. He had been forced to the point where he had to compete with someone else. He had been caught in his own trap. But now that things had come to this, no matter how much regret he felt, it was useless. Right now, the most important thing was to obtain the star inkstone at all costs. This was his greatest hope for rising up in the future. If he missed this chance, he could only be mediocre for the rest of his life. So he definitely could not miss this opportunity. Shopkeeper, I feel that you should first ask whether or not this person can actually produce 1,000 spirit jades. I am very doubtful of this. Yuzha glanced at Lin Yi with hidden enmity. The shopkeeper paused. After looking Lin Yi up and down, he also seemed to be a bit doubtful. After all, Lin Yi's ordinary appearance really did not seem like someone who could casually produce 1,000 spirit jades. Lin Yi smiled and placed the bag on his back in front of them. He opened the bag for the two of them to see that it was filled to the brim with high-quality spirit jades. This was something he had specially prepared before entering the inner street. Yuzha was instantly shocked. He truly did not think that this unassuming, poor wandering cultivator would be able to casually produce so many spirit jades. But when he looked closely, a hint of ridicule appeared on Yuzha's face. He laughed coldly and said, "This bag of spirit jades does look like a lot, but there's 1,000? Heh, I don't think it's even half. You have the nerve to take this out and make a fool of yourself?" The shopkeeper to the side carefully calculated, then nodded and said, "From what I can see, there are about 400 spirit jades in this bag. It is indeed quite far from 1,000 spirit jades. Dear customer, if you can only produce these spirit jades, then I can only say my apologies." Heh, shopkeeper has a good eye. Lin Yi smiled faintly. There were indeed only 400 spirit jades in the bag. Even though he still had some in the space in his jade pendant, and had even gotten 200 from Chan Heihu, some of these spirit jades were waste jades with insufficient spirit jades. They had been thrown into the space in his jade pendant for a short time and hadn't had time to fill up their spirit jades. Since you cannot produce 1,000 spirit jades, then what are you doing here? Then why are we still here? What a waste of time. Hearing this, Yuzha couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Turning his head towards the shopkeeper, he said, "Since that's the case, then I'll pay 1,000 spirit jades." Indeed. The shopkeeper nodded with some regret. He had originally thought that it would be a great situation where two tigers would compete for food. He could earn quite a lot of spirit jades from this, but he didn't expect Lin Yi to only be a bystander, only able to take out 400 spirit jades. He wasn't competitive at all. However, just as the shopkeeper and Yuzha were about to complete the transaction, Lin Yi suddenly spoke up, "Wait, if it's more than 400 spirit jades, I'll sell it to you. What if I add on these 2 foundation establishment barrier breaking pills?" The two of them stared blankly. Then they saw that at some point in time, an antique little box had appeared in Lin Yi's hand. Yuzha's heart sank. Foundation establishment barrier breaking pills were also sold in the Hong Merchant Guild, and they were priced at 400 spirit jades. In other words, these 2 foundation establishment barrier breaking pills were worth 800 spirit jades. Adding on the bag of 400 spirit jades, Lin Yi's bid was equivalent to 1,200 spirit jades, far exceeding his 1,000 spirit jades. Of course, he didn't think that Lin Yi was bragging. Even though the box wasn't open, if there was nothing inside, then Lin Yi would be making a fool of himself. "Dear customer, what do you say?" The shopkeeper turned to look at Yuzha. His meaning was clear. If he couldn't make a higher bid, then this unique piece of star inkstone would belong to Lin Yi. Yuzha was silent for a moment. He glared fiercely at Lin Yi. He was determined to get the star inkstone, and he wouldn't allow anyone to encroach on it. However, Lin Yi didn't even look at him. In a place like this, spirit jades always spoke. Whoever had more spirit jades would have the right to speak. No matter how much Yuzha glared at him, it was useless. I bid 1,200 spirit jades. Yuzha finally gritted his teeth and said, the Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill is worth 400 spirit jades, but that's the selling price. I don't think it's that high to buy it back. 1,200 spirit jades. This was the upper limit of what he could borrow. It was impossible to add even one more. Because even if they wanted to borrow at a high interest rate, it depended on the person. If it was clearly beyond the upper limit of the person's ability to repay, they wouldn't lend it to you at all. Otherwise, it would be all for naught. Even if you killed the other party, you wouldn't be able to recoup your capital. Although he, Yuzha, was an inner sect disciple of Soaring Sky Pavilion, his background wasn't as deep as that of a young master like Su Lingchong. Normally, he could only borrow 1,000 spirit jades. Being able to borrow 200 more was already a favor price. Wanting to borrow more than that was impossible. However, although he could only offer 1,200 spirit jades, Yuzha was still confident that he could win this piece of star inkstone. Because although Lin Yi's 400 spirit jades and 2 Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills were also worth 1,200 spirit jades, one mustn't forget that the price of 1 Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill was 400 spirit jades. This was the Hong Merchant Guild's own selling price. In other words, to the Hong Merchant Guild, the cost of a Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill wasn't even 400 spirit jades. In their eyes, it was already at most worth 300 spirit jades. Therefore, the 2 Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills that Linny had taken out were at most worth 600 spirit jades. Adding on 400 spirit jades, it was actually equivalent to a bid of 1,000 spirit jades. Naturally, it couldn't compare to the 1,200 spirit jades he had. Actually, from this angle, Yuzha believed that a bid of 1,100 spirit jades would completely overshadow Lin Yi's. However, he still chose to directly raise the price to the limit that he could afford. In order to ensure that he could win the star inkstone, he was throwing caution to the wind. As expected, the shopkeeper nodded and said to Lin Yi, "That's right. Although the price of the Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pill is 400 spirit jades, if you want to use it as payment, then it must be calculated according to the recovery price. I can only give you 300 spirit jades. 2 Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills and 400 spirit jades can only be considered as payment of 1,000 spirit jades." Chapter 37-38. By accepting Lin Yi's 2 Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills and 400 spirit jades, the Hong Merchant Association could save themselves the trouble of purchasing goods. But now that Yu Zhai had called out a price of 1,200, it was equivalent to the 2 Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills being exchanged for spirit jades at the price of 400 per pill. Even the trouble of selling them would be saved. Yuzha looked at Linny with a face full of mockery. He was already 90% sure that he would get this piece of inkstone. From what he saw, unless Linny had no other choice, he definitely wouldn't take out 2 Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills as a bargaining chip. This was probably the entire fortune of this poor, wandering cultivator. There was no way he could take out more spirit jades than him. However, Linny opened his mouth and asked in reply, "That's not necessarily the case, right? In the pill display cabinets outside, I saw the same pill with different prices. Could it be that these pills are all sold at the same price?" Hearing this, before the shopkeeper could reply, Yuzha, who was at the side, couldn't help but laugh loudly. He pointed at Lin Yi and mocked, as expected of a poor wandering cultivator who hasn't seen the world. "Let me explain to you. Look at those high-priced pills. They're all imported from Middle Island. They're personally refined by a high-level alchemist there. How can they be the same price as locally produced ones? I don't know where you got your pills from, but how can they compare to Master Middle Islands?" Ha ha ha. Linny smiled faintly and didn't say anything to refute. He only opened the lid of the box in front of the 2 of them. Hiss. Looking at the 2 snow-white pills with faint halos, the shopkeeper couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. He hurriedly pounced forward to examine them carefully, even bringing a special magnifying glass from the side. However, Yuzha didn't see anything strange. Although he could recognize that these were Foundation Establishment barrier-breaking pills, He was just a normal cultivator after all. He wasn't a merchant who specialized in trading like the shopkeeper, and he definitely wasn't an expert alchemist. Foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills were pills that he would only think of when he was breaking through a barrier. At other times, he wouldn't even have the chance to come into contact with them. However, he saw the shopkeeper's unusual reaction. He was somewhat puzzled. Wasn't it just 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills? What was so rare about it? Although the value of the foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill was not low, it was still a very common pill. If it was replaced with the foundation establishment pill, it would still be acceptable. Yuzha disapprovingly curled his lips, but for the sake of the star inkstone, he could only patiently remind, "Shopkeeper, these are just 2 ordinary foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills. According to what you just said, they are worth at most 300 spirit jades each. Even if you add 400 spirit jades, they still can't compare to my bid of 1,200 spirit jades. Just by looking at this kid's poor appearance, you can tell that it's impossible for him to increase the price. What's there to hesitate about? Hurry up, don't waste time." His incessant chatter finally interrupted the shopkeeper's attempt to take a closer look. The shopkeeper stopped and looked at him with a strange expression. "Do you still think that this customer's foundation breaking pellet is only worth 300 spirit jades?" Even though the shopkeeper hid his expression very well, Yuzha could still clearly feel the mockery hidden within. Yuzha's face reddened, and he forcefully suppressed his anger. "Is it not?" The shopkeeper helplessly shook his head. Even though he felt disdain in his heart, as a businessman, amiability always brought wealth. If he didn't explain it clearly face to face, this Yuzha would probably continue to pester him. He could only patiently say, "You just said that even if it's the same foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, how much it's worth depends on the quality, right?" "That's right. So what?" Yuzha suddenly had a bad feeling. The shopkeeper patiently explained, "Even if it's the same foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, the quality is ordinary." "So what?" The shopkeeper patiently explained, "Even if it's the same foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, the quality is ordinary. It can only guarantee a breakthrough to the early stage of foundation establishment or the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment. If you reach the middle stage of foundation establishment, it will be very difficult to have any obvious effect. So the recovery price is at most 300 spirit jades. But if it's imported from the middle island, the higher quality foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill can guarantee a successful breakthrough even after the middle stage of foundation establishment. The recovery price can be over 400 spirit jades." "So what?" "Shopkeeper, you can't be thinking of telling me that this poor loose cultivator somehow got his hands on a foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, and that the quality is comparable to Master Nakajima's foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, right?" Yuzha sneered as he glanced at Lin Yi. Lin Yi responded with a calm smile. He didn't take the other party's provocation to heart at all. Because he didn't need to say anything, there would naturally be people who would slap the other party's face for him. "That's not it." The shopkeeper shook his head. "Then that's incredible." Yuzha's heart instantly relaxed. He was really afraid that this poor loose cultivator, Lin Yi, would somehow get his hands on 2 high-quality foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills. After all, although the probability of this happening wasn't high, if he really ran into some dog shit luck, there was still a trace of a possibility. However, before he could heave a sigh of relief, the shopkeeper gave him a meaningful look. His eyes seemed to be speechless and pitying at the same time. Only then did he open his mouth and continue. "However, other than the normal and high-quality foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills, there is also a type called the top quality. Miracle Dr. Dan Zhongliju's extreme quality foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill was guaranteed to have 100% effect even in the later stages of the foundation. I'm sure you've heard of this before, sir?" Miracle Dr. Dan Zhongliju, as a top-level character who came from the North Island, had long become a name card of the North Island. If a practitioner from the North Island hadn't heard of Zhongliju's story, then they would be too embarrassed to go out and meet people. Elixir God's product must be extreme quality. Yuzha had heard this phrase countless times, and naturally, he had heard of Liju's creation of the ultimate level foundation breaking elixir. It was said that back in the day, Zhang Liju had casually sold a supreme-grade foundation-breaking pellet, and the price was easily raised to thousands of spirit jades. It didn't matter how many spirit jades you had, you might not even be able to get one. Normal high-quality foundation-breaking pellets simply couldn't compare to it. What do you mean? Extreme-quality foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, that's something only an elixir god like Master Zhang can make. Not only does it need to be sold for thousands of spirit jades, but it also needs a deep background to be able to buy it. What does it have to do with a poor loose cultivator like him? Yu Zhe was confused after hearing the shopkeeper's words. Chapter 37-39. After all, he had been in the library for 3 whole years, and he knew everything in the world without even stepping out. Yu Zhe wasn't a refiner, but he knew quite a lot about these things. As far as he knew, in the entire 5 islands of Sky Class, there were only a handful of refiners in history who could concoct a supreme-grade foundation-breaking pill. After all, someone like Zhang Liju was a genius that appeared once every few hundred years, and no one else could even hope to catch up to him. Normally speaking, being able to concoct a high-quality foundation-breaking pill was already considered very rare in the elixir world. In the entire island of Sky Class, there weren't many refiners who could do this, and the North Island's own elixir hall couldn't even concoct it. As for the legendary supreme-grade foundation-breaking pill, that was pure wishful thinking. Plus, even if this poor solo practitioner was lucky enough to get his hands on 2 supreme-grade foundation-breaking pills, he wouldn't even be able to hide it. How could he just take it out to trade? However, the shopkeeper's next words made Yu Zhe, who had made a solemn vow, dumbstruck. I'm sorry, even though the highest quality foundation-breaking pill is a legend, the 2 pills placed in front of us are the real deal. Sir, you're a real man. I apologize for my rudeness just now. With that, the shopkeeper bowed to Lin Yi. A customer who could casually take out 2 supreme-grade foundation-breaking pills like this was a living god of wealth in their eyes. You flatter me. Lin Yi quickly helped him up. Although the shopkeeper wasn't very friendly with him just now, there wasn't anything to criticize about him. He was still rather neutral. However, Yu Zhe, who was at the side, was completely dumbfounded when he heard this. What the hell? How is that possible? Shopkeeper, you're wrong. How could this poor guy take out a top-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill? And 2 of them? Who the hell would believe that? Yu Zhe was stunned for a while before blurting out. However, his voice hadn't even finished resounding out when the manager's originally amiable expression sank. Saying that the manager had made an error of judgment was like scolding a bald donkey in front of a monk, and it was simply a slap to the face. Furthermore, a supreme-grade foundation-breaking pellet was such an important and rare item. How could he have misjudged it? Customer, it's up to you whether you believe in my judgment or not. However, if you speak rudely, I can take it as a provocation to our Hong Chamber of Commerce. Please conduct yourself with dignity, the shopkeeper said with a cold and stern face. As if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head, Yu Zhe suddenly came to his senses. The Hong Chamber of Commerce was a colossus that even the higher-ups of the 3 great pavilions had to treat with respect. As an inner disciple of the Soaring Sky Pavilion, he could still find a sense of superiority in other places, but in front of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, he was not even worth a fart. Not to mention how severe the consequences of offending the Hong Chamber of Commerce would be. Just take the current situation as an example. The star inkstone that he yearned for day and night was still in the hands of the Hong Chamber of Commerce. Yu Zhe hurriedly smiled sheepishly and tried to salvage the situation. Shopkeeper, please don't take it to heart. I was just anxious and made a slip of the tongue. Only then did the shopkeeper's expression soften a little. Looking at him, he said, just these 2 top-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills alone. Even if the lowest recovery price is 800 spirit jades per pill, it would still be worth it. It was already worth 1,600 pieces of spiritual jades. Adding the additional 400 spiritual jades, it was a total of 2,000 spiritual jades. Dear customer, if you can't offer a price of 2,000 spiritual jades or more, then I will have to pay. Then don't even think about getting that piece of staring stone. Even though he said that, In the shopkeeper's heart, even if Yuzhou could take out 2,000 spiritual jades, it wouldn't be enough to make up for Lin Yi's 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills. After all, if it was in the name of a supreme-grade foundation-breaking pill, by attracting a group of second-generation cultivators to participate in the auction, the true profits that could be generated would definitely be far greater than 2,000 spiritual jades. 3,000 for 1,000 was not a problem at all. 2,000 spiritual jades? F***CK. Why don't you just rob someone? Yu Zhe was so agitated that his eyeballs almost popped out of his head. Fortunately, his reaction was fast enough to cover his mouth with one hand. Only then did he manage to prevent himself from cursing out loud. Otherwise, he probably would have been thrown out on the spot. Just now, he had called out a price of 1,200 spiritual jades, which was already his limit. He had even taken an extremely large risk. 2,000 spiritual jades. Even if you beat him to death, he wouldn't be able to take it out. Not to mention how shocked Yuzhe was. At this moment, even Lin Yi, the owner of the Supreme Grade Foundation Establishment Barrier-Breaking Pill, couldn't help but twitch his mouth when he heard the shopkeeper's words. Before, he only knew that the value of a Supreme Grade Foundation Establishment Barrier-Breaking Pill was definitely much higher than a normal Foundation Establishment Barrier-Breaking Pill, but he didn't expect it to be this high. But after thinking about it for a moment, Lin Yi very quickly figured out the reason. After all, a Supreme Grade Foundation Establishment Barrier-Breaking Pill was not the same as a normal Foundation Establishment Barrier-Breaking Pill. This was a rare resource that could only be encountered by luck. As the saying goes, the rarer something is, the greater its value. For the shopkeeper to convert these 2 Supreme Grade Foundation Establishment Barrier-Breaking Pills into 1,600 spiritual jades, this was already a very, very low price. If they were to really sell it, the price would at least double. Moreover, no matter how high the price, there would definitely be people fighting to buy it. Especially those second-generation cultivators with truly deep backgrounds. In order to get their hands on such a rare treasure, they wouldn't care about this bit of spiritual jades. However, although he had underestimated the value of these 2 Supreme Grade Foundation Establishment Barrier-Breaking Pills, Lin Yi didn't feel the pain of losing out. After all, to him, as long as he had the materials prepared, he could refine another Foundation Establishment Barrier-Breaking Pill at any time, and he would definitely be able to refine a Supreme Grade one. However, there was only 1 star inkstone, and if he missed it, there would be no more. Thus, 2 Supreme Grade Foundation Establishment Barrier-Breaking Pills and 400 spiritual jades in exchange for a single star inkstone was absolutely worth it. The shopkeeper waited for a moment. Seeing that Yuzhe's face had turned red and he didn't say anything, he said, "Time is precious. Dear customer, if you cannot quickly give a higher price, then this old man can only announce that the star inkstone is not fated with you." Not fated with me? How can it not be fated with me? I've endured hardships in the scripture pavilion for a full 3 years before finally discovering this priceless treasure that could change my fate. For this, not only did I borrow a high-interest loan of 1,200 spiritual jades, I even thought about it day and night for an entire month, and now I've actually announced that it's not fated with me. F***CKU. It's not fated with me. At this moment, Yuzhe's expression had already become extremely twisted and sinister. It was only because he still had a last shred of reason that he was able to tightly bite his lip and not say anything. Because he knew that if he spoke the slightest bit rudely now, then he would have to face the overseeing experts of the Hong Merchant Guild. The strength of these people was comparable to the core disciples of the 3 great pavilions, and they were not people that he, Yu Zhe, could afford to offend. Chapter 3740. Seeing him gnash his teeth in anger, the shopkeeper couldn't help but shake his head, then directly announced, "Looks like the result is already very obvious. Sir, can I ask you to step back for a moment?" The shopkeeper's expression was still polite, but his words were not courteous at all. Yu Zhe knew that if he stepped back now, that would mean that this unique star inkstone that he had been longing for would belong to Lin Yi, and he would have to return empty-handed. This meant that he, Yu Zhe, had worked so hard for so long, but in the end, Not only did he end up with nothing, he even carried a body of debt because of it. One had to know that although the 1,200 pieces of spirit jade he had borrowed were still piled up in his cave residence and hadn't been put to use, he still had to pay an enormous amount of interest every day. He had only borrowed it for a few short days, but just the interest alone had already reached a shocking 3 digits, and it would only roll up in the future. Originally, if he had been able to successfully obtain the star inkstone, Yuzha wouldn't have cared about this bit of spirit jade at all. As long as he became stronger in the future, not only would these people not ask him to return the spirit jade, but they would instead rush to give him spirit jade, using him as their protective umbrella. But now, his originally beautiful vision was instantly shattered, and what awaited him was cruel reality. Those high-interest lenders would definitely come knocking on his door to force him to pay back the debt, and with his current strength, he couldn't afford to offend these people. One had to know that these people weren't good people. In this way, how miserable his fate would be in the future. Even using his toes to think about it could be imagined. In a short instant, he had fallen from heaven to hell. At this time, Yuzha wasn't just roaring in his heart, he was hysterical, and he was gradually going crazy. But no matter how hysterical he was, Yuzha didn't show it on his face. To the bystanders, he was just silently and unwillingly biting his lip, nothing more. Yuzha glanced at Lin Yi sinisterly, then turned and walked out of the private room. This star inkstone will forever belong to me and me alone. No one can snatch it away. A mere grassroots wandering practitioner dares to fight with me. He really doesn't even know how to write the word death. Sir, when you leave our Hong Merchant Guild later, you have to be careful. Looking at Yuzha's departing figure, the shopkeeper couldn't help but remind Lin Yi. He had been in the Hong Chamber of Commerce for decades and had met countless people. He had seen this kind of situation many times. No matter how well a brat like Yuzha hid, he couldn't escape his fiery eyes. Thanks for the reminder. Lin Yi smiled faintly. Actually, there was no need for the shopkeeper to remind him. Just now, when the other party had looked at him, he had already felt a sharp killing intent. Although it was hidden very deeply, the insidiousness within it was enough to make one tremble in fear. If he couldn't even detect this, then he would be too slow. It seemed like it would be a little troublesome to go out later. Lin Yi sighed inwardly. From the opponent's aura, he could tell that the opponent's strength should be around the middle stage of the Foundation Establishment realm, which was a level higher than his. Although he was never afraid of challenging those with higher cultivation levels, the risk was not small. However, it was just a little risky. Lin Yi had killed his way up from the mortal world. He never knew what fear was. So what if the other party was a middle-stage foundation-building expert? If he really didn't know what was good for him and bumped into him, a massacre might begin. Lin Yi had been on the Heavenly Island for more than a month, but he had never killed anyone. Looking at Lin Yi's calm and composed performance, the shopkeeper immediately thought even more highly of him. Because Lin Yi didn't deliberately hide his aura, he could tell that Lin Yi was a peak early-stage foundation-building expert. And as a peak early-stage foundation-building expert, when faced with the threat of a middle-stage foundation-building expert, he could still maintain such a calm and composed attitude. However, he was still able to maintain such a calm composure. This was quite a rare thing. If it was someone else, they would have already panicked and didn't know how to deal with it. It seemed like this customer was able to casually take out 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills because he had a strong background, and not because he got lucky. After this bit of admiration, the shopkeeper's attitude was much more polite and attentive than before. He took the initiative to ask, "I am Hong Zhong. May I know your name?" Under normal circumstances, a shopkeeper like Hong Zhong was obviously more polite and attentive. Even if he was polite to others, it was only on the surface. He rarely took the initiative to tell others his name. After all, although he was just a shopkeeper of a branch, the Hong's Chamber of Commerce was a first-class top chamber of commerce in Middle Island. Any shopkeeper of a branch had huge resources in his hands. Even the top figures of the 3 pavilions in the North Island were jealous of him. His identity and status were self-evident. Even the core disciples of the 3 pavilions couldn't be compared with him. What's more, Hong Zhong's surname was Hong. The meaning behind this was self-evident. Although Hong Zhong was a collateral relative of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, he was still a member of the Hong family. Since he took the initiative to ask for the guest's name, it meant that the guest had become a special guest that the Hong Enterprises Chamber of Commerce needed to take special care of. This was a good thing that many people yearned for. In the whole North Island, there were not many people who had this qualification. My surname is Lin, and my name is Air. Linny bowed slightly as he replied. So it's young hero Lin. How about we start the transaction now? You can have a look at what you want first. Hong Zhong knew that Linny couldn't wait to get his hands on the star inkstone, so he immediately pushed the wooden box containing the star inkstone in front of Lin and suggested. Okay. Linny nodded. He opened the box and looked at it carefully. After confirming that it was the same star inkstone he saw last time, he said, I have no problem with it. Okay. Hong Zhong immediately packed up the wooden box, and Lin naturally handed over his 2 supreme-grade bottleneck-breaking pills and the bag of 400 pieces of spirit jade on the ground to him. One handed over the money, and the other handed over the goods. After the money and goods were settled, Lin finally felt relieved. The star inkstone he had been dreaming of was finally in his hands. Although he didn't know what it was used for at the moment, he would know after he went back and asked the ghost. Something that could attract the attention of this big shot of the Spirit Beast clan must be a treasure that could only be encountered by chance. After the transaction, Hong Zhong took out a dark green jade card from the cabinet and handed it to Lin. Young hero Lin, this is a spirit jade card. It is recognized and used not only by our Hong Enterprises Chamber of Commerce, but also by all the other large regular merchants on the 5 Heaven Stage Islands. It can be used as a substitute for real spirit jade. This way, when you buy such valuable items next time, you can directly use the spirit jade card. You won't have to struggle to carry a whole bag of spirit jade like this time. That was equivalent to the Union Pay card in the secular world. Chapter 3741. The pure spiritual energy inside circulated, as if it contained an extremely exquisite miniature formation. This was obviously a very rare and high-quality item, and in the middle of the spirit jade card, there was a number. 400. Lin immediately turned his head to look at Hong Zhong in surprise. Did this mean that the extra bag of 400 pieces of spirit jade was directly returned to him in the form of a spirit jade card? Hong Zhong smiled at the right time and said, This is a small token of my humble shop. Please accept it. If you have a large amount of spirit jade, you can find a large merchant like our Hong Merchant Guild at any time and ask them to top up the spirit jade into the spirit jade card. After a pause, seeing that Lin seemed to have some doubts, Hong Zhong continued to explain, Young hero Lin, please do not worry. The spirit jade card has a special miniature formation to protect it. As long as you input your chi to activate it, the miniature formation inside will recognize your unique chi characteristics. No one else can imitate it, change it, or destroy it. And if you need to make a transaction, you only need to input your chi to combine it with another spirit jade card to make a payment. It is convenient and safe. Because every time you use the spirit jade card at a large merchant guild, you will leave relevant information at the merchant union. So even if you accidentally lose it, it is fine. You can find the merchant union to make a replacement. So, wasn't this a Union Link card that had been personally authenticated by Qi? If it was really as Hong Zhong said, then the security of this spirit jade card was indeed quite high. There was the possibility of someone chopping off their finger to impersonate their fingerprint. But for this spirit jade card, unless Lin actively input his Qi for it to identify, even if others killed him, they would not be able to take away even a piece of spirit jade. Then thank you very much, shopkeeper Hong. Lin nodded his head in gratitude. Although he had the space in the jade pendant and did not need to worry about things like storing spirit jade, if he wanted to go to a place like the Hong Merchant Guild to buy treasures, it would still be a little troublesome. In order to prevent the secret of the space in the jade pendant from being exposed, he had to first take out the spirit jade in a place with no one around, then carry it to the Merchant Guild to buy things. Like today, a few hundred spirit jade was not a big deal. He could carry it, but what if he needed thousands, or even tens of thousands of spirit jade in the future? He couldn't possibly carry it back and forth, right? Thus, this spirit jade card was very useful at this time. Moreover, since the merchant union, whose influence spread throughout the 5 great islands, came forward to vouch for them, their credibility was not an issue. Naturally, there was no reason not to accept it. Young hero Lin is too polite. For an important guest like you, preparing a spirit jade card for you is a matter of mutual benefit. It will also make it convenient for you to take care of our business in the future, so there is no need to thank me. Alright, if you use the spirit jade card in the various chambers of commerce under the merchant union, you can get a 10% discount, Hong Zhong said politely with a smile. 10% discount? Linny raised his eyebrows. In the future, if he were to use this card to purchase some treasures, he would be able to save quite a bit of spiritual jade. It seemed that the Commerce Union had put in quite a bit of capital in order to attract big customers. In fact, on this point, Linny was wrong. Although the Spirit Jade card was an important measure pushed out by the Merchant Union to protect their big customers, but while it was used for transactions, it was essentially a symbol of status. It was not that easy to obtain. Not to mention the fact that it was difficult for ordinary people to obtain one, even some second-generation cultivators with a good background, if their status or wealth did not reach a certain threshold, would not be able to obtain such a Spirit Jade card. To put it bluntly, in the entire world of cultivators, those who could produce a Spirit Jade card, that person was definitely rich and powerful. And for Lin Yi to be able to obtain this Spirit Jade card today, it was all thanks to the 2 top-grade foundation barrier-breaking pills. Otherwise, he would not have been able to obtain the true approval of the Hong Merchant Union even if he had paid thousands of spiritual jade for a single star inkstone. Moreover, he would not have been able to obtain a Spirit Jade card from Hong Zhong for no reason. There were even 400 spiritual jade cards in it. Hong Zhong's actions clearly meant that he was planning on taking the long haul, fishing for a big fish. Based on his years of experience with countless people, this young man who called himself Lin Air, although he looked ordinary at first glance, in reality, he was a person who hid his strength deeply. Not to mention the fact that this guy, who was only at the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment, could remain calm and composed in the face of the threat of a mid-stage foundation establishment expert. Just the fact that he could casually produce 2 top-grade foundation barrier-breaking pills was enough to prove that this person was not to be trifled with. Regardless of where he had obtained these 2 foundation barrier-breaking pills, treasures of heaven and earth had always belonged to the strong. For this Lin Air to be able to casually produce 2 top-grade foundation barrier-breaking pills either meant that he was hiding a powerful strength, or that he had a powerful background. There was no third possibility. As for the so-called dogshit luck, Hong Zhong had been the shopkeeper of the Hong Merchant Union for so many years and had seen all kinds of people and things. He had long since recognized this point. In this world of cultivators where cunning people were everywhere and crafty plots and schemes were everywhere, anything that seemed to be a coincidence actually hid a hidden certainty. There was no such thing as dogshit luck. Treasures like the top-grade foundation barrier-breaking pills would only fall into the hands of the strong. There were no exceptions. And those who believed that dogshit luck existed in the world of cultivation, in the end, had not lived long enough to understand. They believed that other people were just idiots who had dogshit luck, but in reality, they themselves were the idiots who had been deceived by appearances. Powerful strength and powerful background. These two were definitely one. Thus, in Hong Zhong's eyes, Lin Yi naturally had value in befriending and developing. Gifting Lin Yi a Spirit Jade card and 400 Spirit Jades was just a test. If Lin Yi's performance in the future became even more awesome, even greater benefits were yet to come. Thank you, Shopkeeper Hong, for your kindness. Then, I will take my leave first. Lin Yi put away the Spirit Jade card and the Star Ink Stone, stood up and said his goodbyes. Young hero Lin, take care. Hong Zhong stood up to send him off. Before he left, he added, Young hero Lin, in the future, if you have something as good as a top-grade foundation barrier-breaking pill that you want to sell, there is no harm in taking care of our Hong Merchant Union's business. When the time comes, if the accumulated value is considerable, this old man can help you upgrade your Spirit Jade card to a VIP Spirit Jade card, allowing you to enjoy a 20% discount and even more benefits. As a businessman, Hong Zhong was actually more curious than anyone else. Why was Linny able to produce 2 top-grade foundation barrier-breaking pills? But even if he thought with his toes, he would know that this involved personal privacy. If he asked on the spot, then he wouldn't be Hongzhong. Chapter 3742. As an old shopkeeper of the Hong Chamber of Commerce for decades, Hong Zhong's grasp of people's hearts could only be described with one word: shrewd and ruthless. All right, then I'll have to trouble you when the time comes. Linny nodded and turned to leave. Lin Yi's heart was as clear as a mirror why Hong Zhong was so attentive to him. To put it bluntly, it was because of the 2 foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills that gave rise to all sorts of mysterious speculations. He wanted to rope Linny in and create more profits for them. This was something that every businessman with foresight would do. It was just that this shopkeeper gene was more experienced and outstanding, making people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Linny was not averse to this kind of thing. In reality, when he first came to Heaven Stage Island, he was in need of this kind of business partner. After all, of the 4 most important things for cultivators, wealth, dharma, companionship, and land, wealth ranked first. Only with a strong wealth could one ensure an endless supply of treasures and level up quickly, all the way to the top of the cultivation world. This wealth, of course, did not refer to the wealth of the secular world, but the hard currency of the cultivation world, such as spirit jades. Although Lin Yi could secretly hide 2 or 3 pieces of spirit jades in the spirit jade mining area every day, and sometimes he could use Ming Tong's group to exchange their waste jades for good jades to increase a little, in the end, it could only be considered a small business and was far from reaching the level of wealth. If he really wanted to unleash the full potential of money, he'd have to make it big. Unavoidably, he'd need to find a reliable business partner. That was the only way he'd be able to unleash his trump cards to the fullest, paving the way for future growth. From the short contact just now, Hong Zhong, the old shopkeeper of the Hong Chamber of Commerce, definitely had the ability to become his business partner. If they could really work closely together, with Lin Yi's trump cards and Hong Zhong's shrewd business ability, it would not be difficult for them to make a name for themselves in the future. Of course, time revealed a person's heart. This matter was related to the future. Lin Yi had to carefully investigate the importance of this matter. Unless he truly knew everything, he would not easily treat anyone as a business partner. At most, he would just use each other. After all, this was a matter of life and death, so he could not be too cautious. After leaving the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Lin Yi was not in a hurry to return to the welcoming pavilion. Instead, he leisurely strolled around the inner street 2 more times. After all, the inner street was only open to the public once a month. Taking advantage of this rare opportunity, he naturally had to familiarize himself with it. There were some things that even if he didn't buy them for the time being, he still had to have an idea in mind. If he could use them in the future, he would be able to use them. He wouldn't be wasting his energy like a headless fly. After strolling through the inner streets, Lin Yi finally left the city square and prepared to return to the welcoming pavilion. However, just as he reached a deserted alley, the jade pendant suddenly began to sound a warning. A fatal sneak attack was about to happen. An extremely sharp sword chi came from a very tricky angle and attacked Lin Yi's back from 100 feet away. It was so fast that it was impossible to defend against it. Relying on the speed bonus of the gale-chasing lightning boots, Lin Yi instantly displayed the butterfly subtle steps to the extreme. Only then did he twist his body, barely dodging the menacing fatal blow. Even so, he still felt a lingering fear in his heart. This sword chi wasn't dazzling. At first glance, it looked sloppy and ordinary. Even the sword chi released by many Heaven Stage experts could be 100 times stronger than this. However, the power of the 2 could not be mentioned in the same breath. If the power of the sword chi of those Heaven Stage experts was said to be 1, which Lin Yi could completely disregard, then the power of this sword chi was at least 800, or even 1,000. If Lin Yi hadn't been able to dodge in time, the only outcome would have been death. If not for the Jade Pendant's life-saving warning, Lin Yi might have already reported to the underworld. Even if Lin Yi wanted to heal, he would need time. Wouldn't the other party take the opportunity to stab him again? Heh, A mere grassroots loose cultivator was actually able to dodge my life, seizing consecutive sword 22 styles. Not bad. A familiar figure slowly walked out from the tree trunk by the roadside. It was Yu Jia, who had just competed for the Star Inkstone at the Hong Chamber of Commerce. As expected, it was this fellow. Linny had long expected this. Previously, when this fellow was at the Hong Chamber of Commerce, he had already revealed a cold-killing intent. It was just that he didn't dare to make a move in that kind of situation. After leaving the Hong Chamber of Commerce, Lin Yi intentionally circled the inner street twice. Actually, the main reason was to find out this fellow's position, because he knew that this fellow would definitely follow him and attack him. However, the result was somewhat unexpected. After circling the inner street twice, even with Lin Yi's perception, he still couldn't find any traces of this fellow. Only then did he helplessly give up and leave the market. In reality, from the time he left the market until now, it had already been a full 30 minutes. Even with Lin Yi's cautiousness, he couldn't help but start to wonder if this fellow had already given up. Thus, a moment of carelessness brought danger. Although Lin Yi's expression was calm, he secretly sighed in his heart. If it wasn't for the jade pendant's warning, just now, this fellow really would have succeeded. This fellow clearly knew that he was at the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment. With the strength of a mid-stage foundation establishment expert, he still foolishly followed him for so long before making a move. Moreover, he didn't care about his dignity at all and chose to launch an unavoidable sneak attack. Whether it was patience or cautiousness, it clearly showed that this fellow was definitely not an ordinary person. Compared to his superficial performance at the Hong Chamber of Commerce, he was like a completely different person. Looking at the strong confidence displayed in Yuji's playful expression, Lin Yi's heart instantly tightened. This fellow had already been acting since the time at the Hong Chamber of Commerce. The superficiality he displayed at that time was completely an act to numb him and make him think that this person was only us. This fellow was far more powerful and cunning than the likes of Meng Jueguang. This was an out-and-out strong enemy. Lin Yi's expression didn't change as he stared at the other party's every move, but his heart was already extremely vigilant. Although he had been at Heaven Stage Island for more than a month, he had already seen many strong people, and even personally felt the power of an elder-level expert. Their strength was far above this person in front of him. However, at the end of the day, these people that he had seen before were not real enemies. They had never so openly displayed their killing intent towards Lin Yi. Even if it was Su Lingchong, Meng Jueguang, who had deep grudges against him, if they wanted to kill him, they would have to rack their brains to find a suitable opportunity. They wouldn't be like this person in front of him, directly killing him without saying anything. Chapter 37:43. Linny laughed bitterly to himself. After wearing this thing, he could hide his identity and do many things that were originally inconvenient, but at the same time, it was equivalent to losing a layer of protection. Don't forget, the three great pavilions always valued newcomers. Anything that involved newcomers was not a small matter, especially if a newcomer was killed, it would definitely alarm the enforcement hall. As a result, even a young master with a deep background like Su Lingchong didn't dare to use simple and crude methods to deal with Lin Yi. He could only use some underhanded schemes. As for other people, they didn't have the guts to do so. Even if they became enemies with Lin Yi, they definitely wouldn't dare to directly kill him. But right now, it was different. Because he was wearing the Thousand Silk Mask, Lin Yi was no longer Lin Yi, but Lin Air. Lin Yi was a newcomer to Blue Cloud Pavilion, but this Lin Air was only a grassroots wandering cultivator of unknown origin. Killing Lin Yi, a Blue Cloud Pavilion newcomer, would cause enormous trouble. But if it was just killing Lin Air, a grassroots wandering cultivator, then nothing would happen. As long as it wasn't in broad daylight, the enforcement hall wouldn't care if you committed murder or arson. What did the life and death of a mere grassroots wandering cultivator have to do with them? If you're a little smarter, then hurry up and hand over the inkstone. That way, I might be able to quell my anger a bit, and I'll leave your corpse intact. Yuzha stared at Lin Yi with a mocking expression, not immediately attacking. He wasn't the slightest bit afraid that Lin Yi would escape. Because in the current situation, Lin Yi was like a mouse that had been forced into a corner by a cat. There was no way for him to escape. A mere peak early-stage foundation establishment wandering cultivator, facing a middle-stage foundation establishment intersect disciple like him, still wanted to escape? How could he escape? Can I ask, what is the use of this star inkstone? Lin Yi was unhurried, raising his eyebrows as he asked. Of course, he didn't really want to know the use of the star inkstone. This kind of thing didn't need the other party to explain. When he returned, the ghost would naturally explain to him. The reason why he intentionally asked this was because he wanted to know how much the other party knew. From there, he could make a judgment. Just how important was it to kill him? That's right, Lin Yi wasn't thinking about escaping, but counterattacking. Although his opponent was a middle-stage foundation establishment expert, and even among middle-stage foundation establishment experts, Lin Yi still had the confidence to kill him. Although it was very difficult to challenge someone of a higher level at the same time, it also had a unique advantage, and that was the natural appearance of a weakling. He could pretend to be a pig to eat the tiger. No matter how cautious his opponent was, he would more or less underestimate his opponent because he thought that he had the absolute upper hand. This was inevitable human nature. The cunning and cruel opponent in front of him was the same. Otherwise, this guy would have killed him long ago. He wouldn't even stop to talk nonsense. Regardless of the level of an expert, underestimating the enemy was always a flaw, especially when facing a so-called weakling like Lin Yi who had a powerful trump card. This flaw was especially fatal. You don't know the uses of starring stones? After hearing Lin Yi's question, Yu Zha was clearly dazed. He didn't know that Lin Yi had so many twists and turns. He had thought that Lin Yi just wanted to clarify things before he died. Yu Zha had a ruminating expression as he sized up Lin Yi. He didn't know the uses of starring stones, but he still dared to take out 2 supreme-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pills. This meant that not only was this wandering cultivator not poor at all, but he was a rare nouveau riche. I only know that this thing isn't simple. As for its uses, I don't know, Lin Yi responded coolly. Heh. Then prepare to die with everlasting regret. You aren't so naive as to think that Laozi will be so merciful as to tell you, right? You're really delusional. Who do you think Laozi is, an idiot? Yu Zha laughed coldly, and a hint of savagery flashed through his eyes. He seemed to be preparing to attack. Lin Yi's heart instantly sank. This guy was not easy to deal with. But then, he heard Yu Zha continue, but if you hand over something valuable, like a supreme-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, then Laozi can let you die knowing. So he wanted to use this opportunity to extort a sum of money. The corner of Lin Yi's mouth curved imperceptibly. He reached into his bosom. When he took it out again, there was a small box in his hand, just like the one he had in the Hong Merchant Guild. He opened the lid. Inside was a supreme-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill. Last time, he had refined a total of 6 pills. He had given 2 to senior apprentice brother Bitter, eaten 1 for Lin Yi, and used 2 to exchange for starring stones. The one in his hand was the last one. Seeing the supreme-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill, Yu Zha's face was filled with greed. Putting aside the fact that the staring stone was a priceless treasure that could change the course of one's fate, the supreme-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill was a fatal temptation to any foundation establishment cultivator, even those at the peak of the late stage. This Yu Zha in front of him was no exception. At the end of the day, even if he could obtain the staring stone, he wouldn't be able to use it immediately. Right now, the practicality of a supreme-grade foundation establishment barrier-breaking pill was far above it. Moreover, this was also a priceless treasure that could only be found by luck. Anything else? If you can take out even more good stuff that satisfies Laozi, then maybe I can consider letting you go. Yu Zha purposely tempted. Letting me go? Hearing this, Lin Yi couldn't help but twitch his mouth. This guy really did think he was an idiot. If he really took out even more valuable treasures, this guy would probably immediately start killing and plundering. There was no way he would let Lin Yi go. That's it. Now you can speak, right? Lin Yi said expressionlessly. Hearing this, Yu Zha couldn't help but shake his head in disappointment. That really is a pity. But to be able to obtain a supreme grade foundation establishment barrier breaking pill, today's trip was not in vain. Of course, I believe that you're definitely hiding some good stuff on you. Since you don't want to take it out yourself, then I'll take it out for you. As he spoke, Yuja's feet instantly exploded, and he pounced towards Lin Yi at a speed that was hard to follow with the naked eye. From start to finish, he had never thought of telling Lin Yi anything, and had even less thought of sparing Lin Yi's life. The reason why he spoke so much nonsense was only because he wanted to extort even more good stuff from Lin Yi. However, since Lin Yi wasn't willing to take it out of his own accord, then he wouldn't force it. In any case, after he killed Lin Yi, these things would still fall into his hands. It was just that during the course of battle, they might be damaged by the sword chi. But since the situation had already developed to this point, if it was damaged, then so be it. He would kill first and talk later. Chapter 3744. Wait, Lin Yi suddenly shouted and placed the foundation barrier breaking pill in front of him. He laughed coldly and said, "If you don't mind me destroying it right now, then bring it on." Before he finished speaking, Yuja's footsteps instantly stopped. He looked at Lin Yi with a murderous look. Even though he had absolute confidence that he could kill Lin Yi and take back the Star Ink Stone, if this dragged on, there was no telling if something unexpected would happen. After all, if he was seen by other experts who were passing by, it would be troublesome. However, even though he wholeheartedly wanted to kill Lin Yi as soon as possible, he couldn't bear to part with this foundation barrier-breaking pill. Just like how he had absolute confidence in killing Lin Yi, if Lin Yi truly wanted to destroy the pill in his hands, it would only take a single thought for him to do so. He wouldn't be able to stop him in time. Fine, then I'll tell you the uses of the Star Ink Stone and let you die knowing. But before that, you have to give it to me first, Yuja said in a low voice. Lin Yi couldn't help but sneer. Do you really think I'm an idiot? If I gave this foundation barrier-breaking pill to you right now, would you still be wasting your breath with me? Then tell me, what do you want me to do to make you feel at ease? Don't say stupid things like I'll tell you first and then give it to me. If that's the case, I'd rather just kill you, Yuja said with a gloomy face. Hearing this, Lin Yi laughed in spite of himself. As a grand middle stage foundation establishment expert, no one would come to a place like this. In other words, no one would be able to save me. My little life is already in your hands. Do you still need to be so petty? If I'm lying to you, at worst you can just torture me and make me beg for death. Wouldn't that be enough? In any case, you won't lose anything. If my character is good and I keep my word, perhaps I can even get a foundation barrier-breaking pill. This kind of opportunity doesn't come often. Yuja looked deeply at Lin Yi. After a moment of silence, he suddenly laughed loudly and said, "All right, since you are a person who is about to die, there is no harm in telling you now. The number of people on Heaven Step Island who know the use of this Star Ink Stone definitely doesn't exceed the number of fingers on one hand. I flipped through all the ancient scriptures in the library pavilion, and only then did I stumble upon an ancient remnant. Although you are about to die, I have to say that you are very lucky." Lin Yi listened attentively without batting an eyelid. A slight ripple appeared in his heart. In that case, this piece of staring stone really did have a significant background. Pausing for a moment, Yuja took a deep breath and said, "According to the records of that ancient remnant page, Star Ink Stone is produced in deep trenches at the bottom of the sea. Over the course of millions and millions of years, it has absorbed the essence of the seabed. As for us cultivators, this is the most generous gift from the heavens. Whoever obtains it will become the strongest golden core stage expert. There is no one else who can compete with it. The strongest golden core expert." Lin Yi was immediately shocked. Ever since coming to Heaven Step Island, although the people he came into contact with the most were newcomers who hadn't reached foundation establishment, other than some special occasions, senior apprentice brother Kubai, who was at foundation establishment, basically couldn't come into contact with experts above foundation establishment. However, this didn't mean that Lin Yi didn't have any concept of the 3 words golden core stage. After all, for cultivators, this was the most basic of common knowledge. The reason why the Welcome Pavilion didn't set up a corresponding teaching curriculum was because this common knowledge was too basic. Like things like strength levels, it was just like eating and drinking for ordinary people. There was no need to waste time teaching them. As long as they went out to interact with people and casually said a few words, they would naturally understand. Simply put, on Heaven Step Island, those below Foundation Establishment were not considered to have started. Foundation Establishment was considered the beginning. Golden Core was considered to have stepped into the ranks of experts. Although according to common sense, cultivators who could cultivate to the Golden Core stage were already geniuses that were 1 in 10,000. However, it should be known that there were also differences between geniuses. The Golden Core stage was the clearest dividing line between all geniuses. It determined the height that each cultivator could reach in the future. For those who were weaker, no matter how hard they worked and how much resources they consumed, they had no hope of breaking through in this lifetime. They could only helplessly stop at the early Golden Core stage. For those who were slightly better, although there was hope to continue to the next level, even if they could break through, they could only become the weakest among the experts of the same level. The rest of their lives were fixed, and there was almost no possibility of a counterattack. Looking at all the Golden Core stage experts, only the most outstanding few could break through all the way and become the group of people who stood at the top of Heaven Step Island. It was no exaggeration to say that the Golden Core stage was a natural moat in front of all cultivators. Whether or not one could cross it, and how one crossed it, would directly affect whether one was a dragon or a worm in the future. The strongest Foundation Establishment stage experts might gradually become trash after breaking through, but the strongest Golden Core stage experts had never been like this before. This was because for thousands of years, history had clearly shown that anyone who could become invincible in the Golden Core stage, as long as they were not killed midway, would inevitably grow into the group of people who stood at the top of Heaven Step Island in the future. There was no exception. This guy was so ambitious. Linny looked at Yuja, whose eyes were burning with passion, and felt that he did not think much of it. It was not that he did not care about the Golden Core stage, but he was currently only at the peak of the early Foundation Establishment stage. The most important thing now was how to break through to the middle Foundation Establishment stage. Thinking about becoming the strongest Golden Core stage expert at this time was really too ambitious. He was like this, and this Yuja, who was only in the middle Foundation Establishment stage, was also the same. At this time, instead of thinking about becoming the strongest Golden Core stage expert, it was more practical to think about how to become the peak of the middle Foundation Establishment stage expert. As for the Golden Core stage, whether or not he could live until then was still unknown. It was better to work hard towards the peak of the late Foundation Establishment stage first. However, in the face of such temptation, not everyone could maintain their calm like Lin Yi. In reality, if Lin Yi did not have these heaven-defying golden fingers like the space in the jade pendant, and suddenly encountered a treasure that could make him the strongest Golden Core stage expert, perhaps he would be like Yuja, unable to extricate himself. Of course, a calm heart was a calm heart. Right now, Lin Yi's expectations towards the Star Inkstone were no less than Yuja's. He, who had all kinds of powerful trump cards, had a higher chance of advancing to the Golden Core stage than others. The significance of the Star Inkstone was naturally greater to him, but he would not let it get to his head. This kid actually knows this kind of secret. Interesting. In his mind, the ghost's long-lost voice suddenly rang out. Chapter 37:45. Although Yuja spoke with certainty and didn't seem to be lying, this fellow was still an enemy. It was more reliable to ask the ghost for confirmation. That's right. In the entire Heavenly Stage Island, the number of people who know of this secret can be counted on one hand. If I hadn't heard about it from the Spirit Beast King, even I wouldn't have known. The ghost explained, the greatest use of the Star Inkstone is to help people perfectly break through to the Golden Core stage. This kind of person is much stronger than experts who break through other methods. Although saying that they are invincible in the Golden Core stage is a bit exaggerated, it's not far off. As long as one's talent is passable, with the help of this thing, it won't be a problem for them to become a big shot in the future. That's why I had you think of a way to buy it. So that's how it is. Linny couldn't help but gratefully say, "Many thanks for Senior's guidance. If it weren't for your reminder, I would have missed this opportunity to obtain this star ink stone." Although the ghost didn't explain in detail, Linny was able to figure out a few things from the words perfectly breaking through to the golden core stage. Just like when he broke through to the foundation establishment stage, there were many ways to break through to the golden core stage. Although none of them were easy, using the star inkstone to break through to the golden core stage was, as expected, the most powerful method. Otherwise, it wouldn't be worthy of the title perfectly breaking through to the golden core stage. Jejia, if you really want to thank this old man, then in the future, think of a way to get me some fresh spirit beast cores. The higher the grade, the better. This old man has great use for them. The ghost cackled. Wasn't this fellow an elder of the spirit beast clan? He actually wanted him to get fresh spirit beast cores, and the higher the grade, the better. Wasn't this encouraging him to hunt down the spirit beast clan? Okay. Although Linny was puzzled, he didn't ask. In any case, if there was a suitable opportunity, he would do as he was told. That's right. Although very few people know about the star inkstone, it is still a rare treasure. I don't need to teach you the principle that treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime, right? In the future, if you want to live a bit more peacefully, it's best to kill this kid. In that case, it's best to kill this brat as soon as possible. Otherwise, once he spills the beans, there will be endless troubles in the future. After the ghostly thing reminded him, it went silent. Linny smiled calmly. Even if that ghost hadn't warned him, he had already been planning on doing this. After all, if too many people knew about a supreme treasure like the star inkstone, that's not a good thing. In the blink of an eye that he had used his consciousness to communicate with the ghostly thing, Yuja had already awoken from his greedy frenzy. After all, this guy was no ordinary person. With his mental fortitude, even if he could not be as calm as Linny, he would definitely not indulge for too long, and he would definitely not be unable to pull himself out. All right, now that you know what you want to know, you can give me the top-grade foundation establishment barrier breaking pill. Yuja stared coldly at Linny. However, Linny smiled at him. Sorry, I didn't intend to give it to you. I lied to you. As he spoke, he stretched out his hand and put away the top-grade foundation establishment barrier breaking pill in his hand. Coupled with the mocking expression on his face, even someone as shrewd as Yuja was completely enraged. One Buddha was born, 2 Buddhas ascended to the heavens. So you're saying that you're prepared to have a taste of living a life worse than death? I'll satisfy you. As he spoke, a savage expression flashed across Yuja's face, followed by killing intent. He was so easily angered? Linny couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. If the opponent was someone like Mingtong, no matter how strong he was, he wouldn't need to worry too much. He wouldn't even need to play any psychological games and think of a way to anger the opponent and make him reveal his weakness. But this guy in front of him, he didn't dare to underestimate him at all. Not to mention the fact that the opponent was stronger than him on the surface, the craftiness and cautiousness he had displayed before made him even more difficult to deal with. Facing such a strong opponent, it wasn't easy to find the opponent's weakness. Don't forget how shallow this guy had pretended to be at the Hong Merchant Guild. Then now, had he really been angered by him? Or was he just beating him at his own game, seizing the opportunity to numb him? Linny wasn't sure. He could only go all out. Even if he had all kinds of powerful trump cards, the opponent was still a strong middle stage, foundational stage expert. If he let his guard down even a little, what awaited him next could very well be eternal damnation. Facing Yuja's rapid approach, Linny didn't retreat. Instead, he advanced and faced him head-on. Using his full strength, his current speed was even faster than the opponent's. Yuja was instantly shocked. Any sane peak early stage foundational stage expert would definitely not have this kind of reaction when facing a middle stage foundational stage expert like him, right? Could it be that this guy thought he could face him head-on? He really didn't know his own limits. He was just a grassroots loose cultivator. Where did this idiot get his courage from? Where did his boldness come from? With a sinister laugh, Yuja immediately used his fingers as a sword. A formless and sharp sword aura immediately extended from the tip of his fingers. It was like a peerless sword showing its edge for the first time. Whether it was the sand, rocks, grass, or trees, they all made a rustling sound. Lin Yi's heart skipped a beat. Only now did he understand that the sword aura that the opponent had emitted earlier wasn't because of some divine weapon, but purely because of his own powerful strength. This opponent was really not to be underestimated. The sword aura that ambushed him earlier was already very strong, but now that the opponent's fingertip was ready to attack, it didn't hide its power like before, and its lethality would only be stronger. But even so, Lin Yi still didn't have any intention of retreating. The two of them used their movement techniques with all their might, and the original distance of 10 feet between them was instantly reduced to an extremely short distance. After a breath, there was only a distance of 10 feet between the two of them. Yuzha seemed to have seen through Lin Yi's intention, and the sword aura that had already gathered at the tip of his fingers didn't attack. He actually used it as a physical weapon, directly stabbing towards Lin Yi's face. And just as the sword aura was about to enter his body, and it seemed that he couldn't avoid it, Lin Yi's body twisted, and at the last moment, he forcefully changed his direction and brushed past the sword aura. I knew you would play this trick. What a small trick, showing off in front of an expert. Yuzha laughed coldly, and the sword aura between his fingers shifted as he prepared. If he hadn't seen through Lin Yi's intention of feigning an attack, but actually taking the opportunity to escape, he would have released this sword aura a long time ago. Chapter 3746. In this way, Yuzha's sword chi would be wasted, and he would even reveal an opening to receive the attack. After all, if he wanted to condense the next sword chi, he would need some time. This might not be a big flaw normally, but in a close combat like this where hands and feet were connected, this was definitely a fatal flaw. But now, he saw through Lin Yi's intentions, and all of this didn't exist anymore. The initiative was completely in his hands, and Lin Yi was just a fish on the chopping board that could be executed at any time. Although you're a little clever, unfortunately, you met me. You're destined not to live past today. Yuzha sneered as he aimed at Lin Yi's panicking back and calculated the direction in which Lin Yi would escape. The sword chi at the tip of his finger instantly whistled as it poured out. Everywhere it passed, jade and stone cracked, and no one could stop it. 23rd move of the deadly continuous sword. Bang! The earth shook and the mountains shook. The powerful sword chi directly split the forest in front of him in half with monstrous power. However, at this moment, Yuzha's face didn't have the slightest hint of complacency. Instead, it was livid, and there was even a hint of panic. There was no other reason. He had actually failed with this sword strike that he was determined to win. In the instant he attacked, he was less than 3 m away from Lin Yi. Moreover, because he had accurately calculated Lin Yi's intentions, he was already prepared. In theory, there was no possibility of him failing. But the reality was that he had failed. Although this monstrous and powerful sword chi destroyed half the forest, it didn't even touch the corner of Lin Yi's clothes. Faced with such an outcome, even a scheming person like Yuzha couldn't help but become angry out of humiliation. The reason why he had failed was actually very simple. Lin Yi's attempt to feign an attack and escape was intentionally revealed by him to Lin Yi. According to his original words, it was, "Sorry, I lied to you. From the beginning to the end." This was a scam, a classic psychological game. Although Lin Yi had all kinds of powerful trump cards and was not afraid of his opponent, he was not stupid enough to fight him head-on. At the end of the day, he was only an expert at the peak of the early stage of foundation establishment. He was one level lower than his opponent. The possibility of suffering a loss was obviously higher. No matter how strong or how confident the weakling was on the surface, if he chose to fight head-on with his opponent, it would always be the worst option. The best option would be to fight him head-on. It was always a psychological attack, trying to lure the opponent into revealing a flaw, and then instantly revealing a powerful trump card, killing the enemy in one strike. Although back in the secular world, Lin Yi could often crush his opponents head-on even when he challenged those of a higher level. Those could only be considered paper tigers. They had the level, but not the strength. If he really encountered such a high-level enemy, it would obviously not be so simple and direct. How many disciples from the 3 pavilions of the North Island were mediocre? Especially the Soaring Sky Pavilion. They were all powerful existences. The psychological game was just a greeting, and the battle had just begun. At that moment, Lin Yi just pretended to move. If it was someone like Meng Tong, who had a slow reaction, this fake move could not fool him at all. Because he could not react at all, let alone perceive the intention that Lin Yi deliberately revealed. But facing Yu Jia at the moment, because his reaction was too fast and his mind was too shrewd, he had long thought that he had grasped Lin Yi's intention, so he fell into Lin Yi's trap. To put it bluntly, this was a psychological game. In fact, it was a psychological trap that Lin Yi had specially set for smart people like Yu Jia. It might not work on other ordinary people, but it was definitely tried and tested for smart people like him who were confident that they could grasp everything. After understanding this in an instant, Yu Jia's face suddenly became extremely ugly. At this moment, there was only a distance between him and Lin Yi. Originally, he was relying on his strength to bully the weak. This distance was the perfect opportunity to kill Lin Yi, and Lin Yi had no chance to escape. However, just because he fell into Lin Yi's carefully designed psychological trap, the situation suddenly took a turn for the worse. At this moment, the one who really had the upper hand was Lin Yi, the weakling. After the killing move that he was determined to kill failed, his move was old, and he did not have the strength to continue. Yu Jia was a master in the middle stage of the Foundation establishment realm, but in a short moment, he revealed a fatal flaw in front of the weakling Lin Yi. Of course, Lin Yi would not miss this carefully designed opportunity. He immediately clenched his palm into a fist, taking advantage of Yu Jia's weakness, and directly punched out. The fiery fist intent immediately surged out, and instantly bombarded the opponent's chest without any hindrance. 23rd style of Frenzy Fist. Humph. You spent so much effort to make me fall into your trap, but it's only this much. After receiving this punch, Yu Jia acted as if nothing had happened. However, before he finished speaking, his body shook violently. Whoosh! The clothes on his chest were instantly burned to ashes, and even the flesh that was exposed inside was scorched black. It was a shocking sight. What was even more shocking was that the fiery fist intent of the Frenzy Fist did not dissipate just like that. At this moment, it was like a raging fire attached to the opponent's body, continuously burning the opponent's body. Even though Yu Jia used his powerful true energy to suppress it and prevent it from continuing to spread, the areas that were already hit were still burning with pain. This was a new change that Lin Yi had just mastered after practicing the 23rd style of the Frenzy Fist. In the previous 22 styles, the Frenzy Fist had always walked the path of extreme yang and extreme hardness. Although this could increase its destructive power, there was not much room for change. It lacked a portion of spiritual energy, and once its destructive power was not effective, it was very easy to fall into a passive state in a high-level battle. However, the fiery fist intent of these 23 styles, aside from being fierce and overbearing, also gave rise to an unending after effect. It was because of this after effect that after Yu Jia was hit, he actually had an additional burning effect. Because of this, the practicality of the Frenzy Fist greatly increased. When facing a high-level opponent, even if its destructive power could not cause fatal damage to the opponent, its subsequent burning effect was still very useful. That was because a burn meant excruciating pain, and under the excruciating pain, even the most intelligent person would often lose their usual rationality. Chapter 3747. Seeing this, Lin Yi couldn't help but shake his head slightly in disappointment. 23 forms of the Frenzy Fist, such a close and defenseless attack on the chest. If the opponent was a peak, early-stage Foundation establishment expert of the same level, just this attack alone would have injured him quite severely. But for Yu Jia, this kind of injury could only be considered a flesh wound at most. It was already good enough that he felt intense pain. On the other side, Lin Yi was still disappointed, but at this moment, Yu Zhao was already tormented by the intense pain to the point of anger. What kind of freaking strange martial technique was this? Although the power wasn't that great, the burning aftereffects were really annoying. Even using true qi could only suppress it and couldn't remove it in a short amount of time. Very good. You're going through all this trouble just to anger me, right? Then I'll tell you now, you've succeeded. Yu Zhao stared coldly at Lin Yi, who immediately retreated after throwing a punch. He gritted his teeth and said, "But unfortunately, this isn't good news for you, because I don't plan on caring about whatever supreme grade foundation establishment barrier breaking pill you have anymore. I'm going to tear you into 1,000 pieces now." After saying this, Yu Zhao forcefully endured the intense pain coming from his chest and took a step forward. The color of the surrounding forest instantly changed. Everything that could move and couldn't move seemed to have the momentum of an incoming storm. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The commotion was far more violent than when he was condensing the 23 forms of the fatal consecutive sword. Was this guy planning on using his ultimate killing move? Lin Yi's heart tightened, and he activated the art of dragon mastery to quickly replenish the true qi he had used up in the 23 forms of the frenzy fist. He held his breath and focused his mind, silently waiting for the opponent's next attack. If they were of the same level, perhaps Lin Yi would have chosen to make the first move. After all, sitting and waiting for death had never been his style. But right now, he was the weaker one on the surface. In order to make good use of this advantage, he had to choose to temporarily endure. Only after finding 100% chance of success would the trump card's killing move truly have the effect of a decisive blow. If he used it to fight against the opponent's powerful martial technique for no reason, he would only expose his trump card in advance. Apart from that, it was meaningless. Seeing Lin Yi's nervous posture as if he was facing a great enemy, Yu Zhao gathered an unprecedentedly powerful aura as he sneered disdainfully, "Weaklings are weaklings. So what if they rack their brains to get the upper hand? In the face of an absolute gap in strength, no matter how many schemes and plots you have, they are just a joke." Today, I will let you experience what it means to not provoke a strong person before you die. If only his body didn't have this incessant burning pain. Perhaps he would still try to scheme against Lin Yi, but now, he clearly did not have the patience to do so. At the end of the day, what truly determined the outcome of a battle was still strength. Once one possessed sufficient strength, all one had to do was crush his opponent to death. There was no need to waste too much effort. As his voice fell, Yu Zhao's figure once again shot towards Lin Yi like a cannonball. His speed was much faster than the speed he had displayed just now. In the blink of an eye, he had already arrived in front of Lin Yi. Lin Yi's heart jumped. This guy had indeed hidden his strength. If he hadn't used the 23rd form of the Frenzied Fire Fist, but had rashly used the 22nd form of the Frenzied Fire 8 Trigrams Palm, the strongest killing move. If he had used up all the vital energy in his body and this guy saw that he was exhausted, the consequences would have been unthinkable. Because with the speed he was displaying now, even though the opening just now was not small, if he had used his full strength, he still had a chance to avoid it. But if Lin Yi had just straightforwardly used the only killing move that could kill his opponent, then it would really be a big joke. It could be seen that after this guy had fallen into his psychological trap, he wasn't as panicked as he appeared. Instead, he had conveniently set up a trap for himself. If he had thought that he had grasped a fatal opening and didn't hold back, then he would already be a corpse on the ground. As expected, he was a dangerous and cunning guy. He was full of schemes. His figure flashed in front of Lin Yi. Yu Zhao raised the sword energy on his fingertip high. Looking at his posture, it seemed that he was going to cut Lin Yi from head to toe. With one sword, he would cut Lin Yi in half. In reality, if he really cut down like this, and Lin Yi didn't have time to dodge in advance, this was almost a foregone conclusion. Because this sword energy was even sharper and stronger than the previous one. Even if Lin Yi used the 22nd form of the Frenzied Fire 8 Trigrams Palm, he might not be able to match it. Unfortunately, how could Lin Yi just stand there stupidly and let him cut him? The sword energy was about to reach his head. Lin Yi instinctively wanted to dodge to the side. But before he could move, he instinctively felt a fatal premonition. At the same time, the jade pendant space was also giving off warnings. Yuja's eyes flashed with disdain as he watched Lin Yi dodge to the side. As expected, in front of absolute strength, all schemes were useless. He just used his strongest move, and Lin Yi wouldn't be able to escape this at all. If he didn't dodge, he would die. If he dodged, he would die. This was his strongest move, the fatal 24 forms of the continuous sword. It was a terrifying move that could only be practiced after reaching the middle stage of the foundational level. The opponent was merely a grassroots solo cultivator at the peak of the foundational level. How could he be dodged so easily? The sword seemed to give the opponent a chance to dodge, but in reality, he didn't. Because the 24 forms of the fatal 24 forms of the continuous sword didn't end here. There was an even more fatal follow-up move waiting for him. As expected, the moment Lin Yi dodged to the right, he found that there was already another Yuji on the right. The tip of the finger was also condensed with a powerful and sharp sword energy. This Yuja had been waiting here for a long time. This wasn't the real body. It was just a temporary illusion created by the 24 forms of the fatal 24 forms of the continuous sword. However, although Yuja was fake, the sword energy was real. Its power was exactly the same as the one on the tip of the finger of the real body. As long as he willed it, the second follow-up sword chi and shadow could appear within 2 feet of him at any time. In this way, no matter how the opponent dodged, he could only dodge the first sword chi, but could never dodge the second one. This was the domineering power of the 24 styles of deadly consecutive swords. Die in peace. Yuja smiled at the terrified Lin Yi. Because Lin Yi dodged, the sword energy in his real body's hand was completely split open. However, the one in the illusion's hand hit Lin Yi's back. Chapter 3748. However, the smile on Yuja's face instantly froze. Looking at Lin Yi, who was still standing in front of him, he blurted out in disbelief, "How is this possible? With the power of the 24 sword forms, even a mid-stage foundation establishment practitioner wouldn't be able to stand here, let alone a mere foundation establishment practitioner like Lin Yi, even if he wasn't dismembered by the sword energy." Lin Yi, on the other hand, was covered in blood. He replied with a faint smile, "I'm really sorry. I already expected your second sword chi. The reason why I deliberately let you hit me was just to trick you again. I'm a humorous person. I'm really sorry to disappoint you." Before he finished speaking, Lin Yi didn't wait for his opponent to react. He directly activated the true chi that he had been accumulating for a long time and hit his opponent's chest with his palm. With the enhancement of the essence necklace, the 22 forms of the Mad Fire 8 trigrams palm. At this moment, Yuja had just used the 24 forms of the deadly continuous sword and consumed a large amount of true chi. He was completely in a state of exhaustion and was completely defenseless against Lin Yi's palm. A middle-stage foundation establishment realm master was directly hit by Lin Yi's palm and flew 10 feet away. His chest made a cracking sound, and not only did it cave in, blood kept spurting out of his mouth in a bloody arc. He couldn't even perform the most basic quick recovery movement. He smashed onto the ground and didn't know if he was dead or alive. In front of absolute power, all schemes are just a joke. That's true. I'll take this as an early praise from you. Lin Yi looked at Yuja, who didn't know if he was dead or alive. He sucked in a cold breath and struggled to straighten his body. He gritted his teeth and raised his hand to look at his bloody left armpit. Fortunately, although the injury wasn't light, it wasn't too serious. It wouldn't be too troublesome to recover. The reason why the injury appeared on his left armpit was because Lin Yi had predicted his opponent's attack and prepared in advance. Originally, he could have tried to avoid the second sword and retreat. He had lost the opportunity to kill his opponent, and it would not be easy to find such an opportunity again. Therefore, he came up with this plan on the spur of the moment. He deliberately adjusted his body so that the second sword energy would pierce through his left armpit, giving others the false impression that the sword energy had pierced through his left arm. However, in fact, This injury was far from fatal to Lin Yi. After deceiving the other party's eyes, the next step would be simple. With the 22 styles of the Raging Fire 8 trigrams palm, the world fell silent. Originally, with Yuja's cautiousness and cunning, no matter how much effort Lin Yi put in, it would be hard for him to find a chance to kill Yuja. This was because if something went wrong, Yuja would immediately react. Even if Lin Yi used a killing move, he might not be able to kill Yuja. However, after being burned by the frenzied fire fist, he gave up on thinking and chose to use his strength to crush Lin Yi. This was the root of his tragedy. When both sides' true strength was about the same, psychological warfare was the key to deciding who would have the last laugh. After all, both sides' strength was about the same. What could one use to crush the other? Therefore, in this battle, when Yuja gave up thinking, the winner had already been decided. Lin Yi let out a long breath. After calming his breathing, he walked towards Yuja. Although today's battle was a psychological victory, it was not easy at all. As the saying goes, to get rid of evil, one must cut the weeds at the roots. Now that things had developed to this point, he naturally would not let the other live. If the other was already dead, then that would be for the best. But if he was not dead, then he had to take advantage of the fact that the other was heavily injured and unable to move to finish him off. Otherwise, if he found a chance to slip away, there would be no end of trouble. As he slowly approached the other, he paid attention to every movement on the other's body. However, when Lin Yi was less than 2 feet away from him, Yuja was still lying on the ground, facing the yellow soil. There was no sign of life. It felt like he was completely dead. Not normal. Lin Yi was instantly alarmed. If it was a peak early-stage foundational cultivator, his frenzied fire 8 trigrams palm 22 moves could definitely kill him. But if it was used on a middle-stage foundational cultivator like Yuja, it was a bit of a stretch. Even with the power of the profound chi necklace, the most it could do was seriously injure the other and bring him to the brink of death. It was unlikely to completely kill him. It definitely wouldn't be like this, where not a single sound came out. With the cunning that this fellow had displayed before, it was not impossible for him to feign death at this time, numb himself, and then wait for an opportunity to counterattack. In fact, it was highly possible. If it was someone else, they might want to get closer to confirm whether the other was dead or alive. But Lin Yi stopped 2 feet away. As he used the space in the jade to replenish his inner chi, he secretly circulated his chi to prepare the 21st move of the Frenzied Fire 8 trigrams palm. Although the power of the 21st move of the Frenzied Fire 8 trigrams palm couldn't be compared to the 22nd move, it was more than enough in this situation. Lin Yi had already made up his mind. It didn't matter if the guy was faking his death or not, he'd give him another slap first. Once he was done, the guy wouldn't be able to fake his death anymore even if he wanted to, because he'd be dead through and through, with no chance of survival. As expected, after sensing Lin Yi's intention, the already dead corpse on the ground finally couldn't hold back anymore. He suddenly rolled to the side to escape from Lin Yi's slap. At the same time, his hand sprinkled a silver-gray powder. Lime? This was Lin Yi's first reaction. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. A middle-stage foundational cultivator couldn't win in a fight, so he threw lime to escape. This kind of déjà vu of a street thug was a bit too funny, wasn't it? However, Lin Yi immediately realized that this throw of lime was unusual. Not only could it be used to block vision, but more importantly, it could also explode. Boom! The earth shook and the mountains shook. The explosion of this small throw of lime actually created a small mushroom cloud, which really shocked Lin Yi. If he hadn't gathered his chi in advance and prepared the 21st move of the Frenzied Fire 8 trigrams palm, he decisively used it to offset most of the frontal impact. Fortunately, he wasn't too close just now. Otherwise, if he was caught off guard, just this explosion alone would definitely cause him more injuries. In that case, it might even be possible for the opponent to find an opportunity to counterattack. This was simply a powerful, artificially created dust explosion. Chapter 3749. Chase. This was the first thought that came to Lin Yi's mind. However, at this moment, the other party should have already escaped for a while, and it was difficult to find the right direction in such a short time. Just as Linny was about to find a direction to try his luck, he heard footsteps coming from afar. His heart suddenly tightened. If the matter of him chasing Yu Jia was seen by others, then this matter would be troublesome. After all, this guy was an inner court disciple of Soaring Sky Pavilion. If Lin Yi dared to kill him in front of others, it was simply challenging the three great pavilions in public. Even if he was courting death, it would not be in such a way. Hearing the footsteps getting closer and closer, Lin Yi couldn't help but feel helpless. His current state was a little better than Yu Jia's, but it wasn't that much better. Putting aside the fact that he wouldn't be able to continue the chase after being found, if it was someone with bad intentions and wanted to take advantage of him, he wouldn't be able to escape even if he wanted to. To be safe, Lin Yi could only give up the idea of chasing and killing him. As he quickly left the scene, he sighed endlessly. This guy was really cunning and difficult to deal with. Even this couldn't kill him, and he actually ran away. Was this guy born in the year of the weasel? Moreover, this guy's trump card, other than the life-taking chainsword that was split into two, he actually still had this strange and powerful powder. He was really cunning and could not be underestimated. However, this time, such a great opportunity was run away. In the future, it would be very difficult to get rid of this person. After all, although he knew that the other party was an inner court disciple of Soaring Sky Pavilion, he did not even know who his name was. It would be very difficult to encounter such an opportunity where there was no one around. Plus, even if there was a chance like this in the future, Lin Yi wouldn't be able to play mind games like he did this time, given the cunning, caution, and strength Lin Yi had displayed. Unless he used an even stronger power to crush him, it would be almost impossible to play mind games like this time. Forget it. Since he ran away, it can't be helped. It seems that when I use the 1,000 Silk Mask and the identity of Lin Second in the future, I have to be more careful. Lin Yi shook his head helplessly. Fortunately, he was wearing the 1,000 Silk Mask today to hide his identity. Otherwise, if he were to become enemies with the other party with his real identity, he would not be able to live in peace in the future. He already had Su Lingchong and Meng Jueguang as his sworn enemies. If he were to add the cunning and cruel Yu Jia to the mix, he would have to waste his time with this bunch of idiots every day in the welcoming pavilion if nothing unexpected happened. Then what was the point of concentrating on cultivation? Avoiding the eyes and ears of others on the way, Lin Yi smoothly returned to his cave in the welcoming pavilion. He immediately began to heal his wounds. Although he felt some regret that he hadn't been able to kill Yu Jia, the fact that he had successfully bought the Star Inkstone today could already be considered a great success. It was a treasure that could help people perfectly break through to the gold core stage. If this matter were to spread out, it would be a powerful opportunity that everyone in the world would covet. Although Lin Yi wouldn't be able to use it for the time being, there would be a day in the future when the strongest gold core stage expert would step into the ranks of the top experts on Heaven Stage Island. Just thinking about this kind of thing was enough to make one's blood boil. What Lin Yi didn't know was that after the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, not far from the center of the dust explosion, under a thick layer of yellow soil, a half-dead, heavily wounded fellow crawled out with great difficulty. It was Yu Jia. Although from beginning to end, Lin Yi had used psychological warfare to toy with his opponent, there was one thing that he had made a mistake. He had underestimated the power of his Wildfire 8 trigrams Palm 22 forms. Although the 22 forms couldn't directly kill a middle-stage Foundation establishment expert, with the perfect opportunity just now, he had used almost all of his power. That palm had almost used 100% of its power. Even if Yuzha didn't die after being hit by that palm, he would be seriously injured. And then he had used the powder to release the dust explosion, causing him to be injured on top of his own injuries. It was impossible for him to escape very far in such a short period of time. Although Yuzha knew that as long as he ran to a place with people, Lin Yi wouldn't dare to chase after him no matter how bold he was. The problem was, he had followed Lin Yi for so long and purposely went to such a remote corner to launch a sneak attack. If he wanted to return to the main road with more people, he would have to escape at least 2 miles away. With his injuries, it was impossible for him to hide from Lin Yi's senses and run that far away, so he could only seek survival in this dangerous situation. He stayed where he was and used the opportunity of the dust explosion to bury himself deep in the soil. The only chance of survival was to bet that Lin Yi wouldn't stay here for too long. This was a truly ruthless move. Not to mention how long Lin Yi would stay. Doing this would force him into a dead end. It was impossible for a normal person to survive being buried deep in the soil. Although a middle-stage foundation establishment expert like him wouldn't be a problem, don't forget that he was currently in a state of near death from serious injuries. If he was buried for a little longer, he would suffocate to death like a normal person. Moreover, even if he didn't suffocate to death, he might not have the strength to struggle out of the soil. At that time, he would still die. However, Yuzha didn't think that much and just did it. He was fighting for survival in the face of death. In the end, he was caught by this last chance of survival. Of course, this chance of survival was also due to luck. If someone hadn't passed by at that time, Lin Yi would definitely have stayed and searched carefully instead of letting him go so easily. It could only be said that heaven never bars one's way. Although Yuzha's idea of attacking Lin Yi was a mistake from beginning to end, his luck in the end wasn't bad. Even if he knocked into an iron plate and had his teeth broken, he was still able to keep his life. Huff, huff. Finally seeing the light of day again, Yuzha greedily gasped for air. Although the injuries on his body were so severe that he could die at any moment, with the life force of a middle-stage foundation establishment expert, if there was no external interference, as long as he didn't want to die, he still had a chance to survive. Heh, luckily I had a trump card. Otherwise, I really would have been caught off guard and killed by you today. Swaying, Yuzha forcefully propped himself up from the ground. However, he didn't leave. Instead, he looked around based on the route that Lin Yi had taken before. He weakly muttered to himself in confusion. In this direction, there's only the welcoming pavilion. Normal grassroots loose cultivators wouldn't go this way. Could it be that this guy is actually a newcomer to the welcoming pavilion? That's not very possible. Since when did the welcoming pavilion have a newcomer at the peak of the early stage foundation establishment? Or is this guy the manager of the welcoming pavilion? Chapter 3750. No matter what, he had to take revenge today, and he had to find a way to get that star ink stone. But if he wanted to do this, the most important thing was to recover from his injuries. Only after investigating this guy's background would it be convenient for him to act. Thinking of this, Yuzha's stumbling footsteps suddenly paused, a sinister look flashing in his eyes. But before that, he could instigate others to do some things for him. At least he could find a way to investigate this guy's background, and that cheap master of his just happened to be an excellent candidate. Leaving aside the fact that Yuzha was plotting revenge on Lin Yi, after Lin Yi obtained the star ink stone, he very quickly returned to the normal rhythm of welcoming newcomers. During the day, he still punctually went to the Jade Spirit Hall to mine, and at night, he still meditated and cultivated in his cave residence. Occasionally, he would exchange his experiences with his bitter senior brother and the others, chatting about the latest happenings on Step Island. Apart from that, Lin Yi didn't care about Yuzha's matters in the slightest. After all, the one who had a grudge with Yuzha was Lin's second, not him, Lin Yi. Because during this period of time, apart from cultivating and stabilizing his strength, the only thing he needed to deal with was the newcomer assessment in the next segment of Welcoming Pavilion. Lin Yi didn't need to use the identity of Lin's second for anything, so he naturally didn't need to worry about it. After all, as long as Lin's second didn't appear, then even if Yuzha found 1,000 or 800 super experts to seek revenge, it would be useless. Because no matter how many people they had, it was impossible to find this non-existent Lin second. Since they couldn't find Lin second, then the so-called revenge was naturally out of the question. After several days of peace, the third segment of the newcomer assessment was finally about to begin. At this time, the newcomers who had been injured in the resistance test had basically recovered, and everyone's points were announced on the public list. On the side of Blue Cloud Pavilion, Lin Yi had a strong performance with 2 consecutive divine full marks. He had a total of 105 points in the first two segments, firmly occupying the top spot. His advantage was so great that no one could shake it. Mingtong, who was in second place, had a total of 72 points. Lin Yi had pulled away from him by 33 points. Anyone with a discerning eye could already tell that as long as Lin Yi performed normally in the assessment segment, he would not make any fatal mistakes. Even if he couldn't achieve a godly full score like the previous two rounds, he had almost locked in first place in Blue Cloud Pavilion in advance. He was the real number one seed of Blue Cloud Pavilion. After Mingtong, Xiao Ran ranked third with 43 points, Xiao Hongkai ranked fourth with 42 points, and Li Jingming ranked fourth with 41 points. He was ranked fifth. The rest of the Clear Cloud Pavilion's newcomers were clearly separated from the previous five. Their points were all below 30 points, and the last one at the bottom only had a pitiful 11 points. Although the rookie assessment had only completed two segments, there was already a clear gap between the rookies. Even in the assessment segment, some rookies might be good or bad at the assessment segment, so their points would inevitably fluctuate. But overall, it was almost impossible for the rookies at the back to pose a threat to the ones at the front. Even if the freak Lin Yi and Mingtong, who was supported by Mengjueguang, just Xiao Ran, Xiao Hongkai, and Li Jingming had each pulled away from them by more than 12 points. Although a difference of 12 points did not seem too exaggerated, these people were not freaks like Lin Yi, who could easily get a godly full score. Even if they could occasionally surpass the three in a few segments, their overall strength was obvious. It would be good enough if they could maintain the point gap and not continue to widen. It was not realistic for them to catch up. Otherwise, they would not have only obtained such a pitiful number of points after two segments. Meng Jueguang's eyes twitched as he looked at the ranking on the public list. He was the most powerful senior in charge of all the Blue Cloud Pavilion rookies. He was even going to aspire for the throne of the third Pavilion Master in the future. He was not someone a marginal figure like Senior Brother Ku, but could be compared to. That was the truth. Other than Lin Yi and the other two who did not have eyes, the other rookies had all pledged their allegiance to him. Senior Brother Ku could not compete with him. However, at this moment, even Meng Jueguang, who had always been thick-skinned, couldn't help but blush in embarrassment at this embarrassing ranking. He had a total of 12 Blue Cloud Pavilion rookies under him. Among the top 5 of the leading group, only 2 of them occupied the top 2 spots. One was Mingtong in second place, and the other was Li Jingming in 5th place. On the other hand, the lonely senior brother's 3 underlings were all on the list, and one of them was Lin Yi, the one they saw as a thorn in their side. The one they had plotted against was unquestionably number 1, and no one could shake his position. With such a sharp contrast, it was really embarrassing to the point of hurting one's balls. This was because Meng Jueguang did not know about Li Jingming. If he knew that Li Jingming had betrayed Lin Yi and become a spy, he would really vomit blood. As the senior brother in charge of the Blue Cloud Pavilion rookies, he could only occupy one of the top 5 rookies. How the F***CK could he face others? Meng Jueguang even subconsciously felt that the rookies under him had been looking at him strangely for the past few days. In the long run, when these rookies gradually began to believe that he could not bring them any benefits, or that he could not even compare to their bitter opponents, it would be troublesome. Once he lost his prestige in front of these rookies, even if he, Meng Jueguang, was able to sit in the position of third pavilion master, he would only be a commander without an army. His situation was not much better than Liu Bianren, who was about to be kicked away. No, I have to quickly think of a way to curb this development. Previously, because he had been thinking of ways to kill Lin Yi, Meng Jueguang almost did not spend much effort in this aspect. But now that he was aware of this huge potential crisis, he naturally had to think of a way to solve it. Because his plan to kill Lin Yi failed twice, especially in the resistance assessment, he racked his brains to plan such a flawless fatal trap, but Lin Yi escaped unscathed. Therefore, before they understood Lin Yi's background, whether it was Su Lingchong, young Master Su, or Meng Jueguang himself, they did not have the intention to touch Lin Yi for the time being. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.